Texas is a land of wide skies and long roads, and some of those roads lead nowhere. Beneath the sprawl of cities and the hush of small towns, people vanish, quietly, permanently. No ransom notes. No last goodbyes. Just the echo of lives interrupted. In this video, we're diving into 33 chilling disappearances across the Lone Star State stories, with no endings, no answers, and no sense of peace. Some were found. Most weren't. All remain unexplained. And if you think vanishing without a trace is rare, you haven't looked closely enough at Texas. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed, especially if you like your mysteries long, unresolved, and quietly unsettling. And while you're here, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Midnight in Austin? 3 a.m. in Nebraska? We're listening. Fort Worth Missing Trio? Rachel Trelica? Renee Wilson? Julie Mosley. It was the 23rd of December, 1974. A chilly Monday in Fort Worth, Texas. The kind of day where shopping malls became warm pockets of joy, glittering with red bows, synthetic Santas, and that curious seasonal mix of cinnamon and consumerism. 3 girls, Rachel Trelica, 17, Renee Wilson, 14, and Julie Mosley, just 9, were headed out for a day of holiday shopping. They never came back. They had every reason to come home. Rachel was newly married. Her husband, Tommy Trelica, worked at a local store. Renee had a boyfriend, Terry, who'd given her permission reluctantly to go. And Julie had practically begged her mother to let her tag along with the older girls, promising she'd be home before dinner. They were supposed to visit Seminary South Shopping Center and return in time for evening plans. But what followed was not a holiday tragedy. It was something else, something worse. At first, it didn't feel like a disaster, just a delay. Maybe they got sidetracked. Maybe they met up with friends. Teenagers can be unpredictable. But when night fell and there was no word, no call, no sign, the worry set in. Then came the fear. The girl's car, a 1972 Oldsmobile driven by Rachel, was discovered in the Sears parking lot. Locked. Christmas presents scattered in the back seat. No sign of the girls. No sign of struggle. And no hint of what had happened in that invisible sliver of time between a casual shopping trip and an enduring urban legend. The police? At first, they treated it as a runaway case, that classic cocktail of teenage impulsiveness and overprotective parents. But there was no real motive. Rachel had left behind a husband she seemed happy with. Renee had been grounded recently, but nothing earth-shattering. And Julie? She was a kid. You don't run away 2 days before Christmas when you still believe in Santa Claus. Then, a letter arrived. It was postmarked the day after the girls vanished, and addressed to Tommy Trelica. The handwriting was loopy and inconsistent, signed simply, Rachel. It said they were going to Houston, that they would return in about a week, but the tone felt wrong, stilted, almost rehearsed. Rachel never called Tommy Thomas, and yet the letter did. Her name was even misspelled on the envelope. The stamp hadn't been canceled properly, making it impossible to trace exactly where it came from. And just like that, the case deepened not with answers, but with layers. Over the decades, theories came and went. One persistent thread is that the girls were taken by someone they knew, someone they trusted. There was no scene, no commotion, no alarm. Just nothing. It would be easier, in some twisted way, if there were more chaos. But silence leaves room for something more dangerous than violence. Ambiguity. A man named Edward Dub Billy, Julie Mosley's stepfather, kept a meticulous record of every phone call, tip, and newspaper clipping. He passed away in 2017, never knowing what became of the little girl he tucked into bed 2 nights before Christmas. Renee's mother, meanwhile, haunted by grief, died young. Rachel's husband remarried. Time moved on, but the case did not. You want to believe that something will turn up, that a box of dusty Polaroids will emerge from an attic, that a deathbed confession will unlock the entire puzzle, that DNA or surveillance or some long-forgotten storage unit might finally whisper the truth. But the problem with hope is that it ages poorly, it spoils, it turns into folklore. And that's exactly what this has become, a Fort Worth fable passed down through quiet conversations and message boards. Whatever happened to those 3 girls? It didn't help that the shopping mall was eventually demolished. The concrete walls that might have heard something, a scream, a plea, a whispered warning were reduced to rubble. The city changed. But the ghost of that day never left. Could it have been an abduction ring? A runaway turned tragic? A jealous acquaintance with a dark agenda? Every theory has been proposed and shot down, usually by the same people who proposed them. Investigators followed dead-end leads from Florida to Mexico. Psychics were consulted. Hypnosis sessions were tried. Even a man who claimed to have dug up evidence under a home in East Fort Worth ended up finding nothing but embarrassment. Everyone wants to solve it. No one can. And still, the car was locked. The gifts were untouched. The lot was full. The mall was busy. And yet, not a single reliable witness saw what happened to 3 girls in the middle of the Christmas rush. That's not just unexplained. That's surgical, almost inhuman. Now, 5 decades later, Fort Worth remains 2 cities, the one you see on the map and the one that lives in the margin between fact and theory. In that latter city, Rachel, Renee, and Julie are still alive, frozen in the mall parking lot, just stepping out of the Oldsmobile, eyes wide with holiday lights, unknowingly walking into a moment that would never let them go. You can convince yourself it was a crime of opportunity, or fate, or something darker that language hasn't yet made room for. But as long as there's no answer, there's only the next empty space. And Texas, for reasons no one fully understands, has a lot of those. Brandon Lawson. On the night of the 8th of August, 2013, a 26-year-old oilfield worker named Brandon Lawson walked out the front door of his San Angelo home and into the vast, tangled fabric of Texas mystery. He left behind a partner, 4 kids, and a string of bad hours, the kind where everything that could go wrong already had. He was upset, he was low on gas, and for reasons still argued about on forums and podcasts and in local bars, he never came home. Brandon had called his brother Kyle that night. Around 12:30 a.m., he said he was heading to his dad's place in Crowley, a 3-hour drive away. The reasons for the trip have never been entirely clear. Tension at home, maybe. A fight with his longtime girlfriend, Ladessa, possibly. He took off in his silver Ford F-150, wearing a t-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops. No wallet, no real plan. Just a rough sense of direction and a phone with a dying battery. An hour later, sometime around 1:15 a.m., Brandon called 911. This is the part where the story warps. "Yeah, I'm in the middle of a field," Brandon said. His voice was frantic, unsteady. "My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. The guy's chasing me into the woods. Please hurry." That's the part everyone hears in the YouTube videos. But the full 911 call, which has been slowed down, transcribed, argued over like some kind of Texas Zapruder tape, is riddled with ambiguity. Words slur. Sentences overlap. Some think he said, "They're after me." Others hear, "I need the cops." Some think he was hallucinating. Others say he saw something real and it scared him enough to make that call. The dispatcher tried to get his location, but the call cut off. Just static and silence. When Kyle arrived on scene shortly after, he found Brandon's truck parked haphazardly off US. Route 277, near Bronte, in Coke County. It wasn't wrecked. The lights were on. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle. But Brandon was gone. He'd left no footprints, no trail, no goodbye. In the days and weeks that followed, the area was searched. On foot, from the air, With dogs, with volunteers, with drones, nothing. You could throw a rock in any direction out there, and it would land in desolate ranch land, or thick brush, or scrubby mesquite. Coyotes howl at night. Cell service drops off into nothingness. It is, in every sense, the kind of place a person could vanish. For years, Brandon Lawson became a case study in online obsession. His 911 call was picked apart frame by frame. Theories bred like tumbleweeds. Was it foul play? A drug-induced panic? Something paranormal? Did he wander off and collapse from the elements? Or did someone find him first? Everyone had a favorite theory, and none of them held. What they held was emotion, the need to solve something unsolvable. Kyle maintained, for years, that his brother hadn't been himself that night. But he also insisted that Brandon had sounded scared genuinely, profoundly scared, and that fear wasn't coming from nothing. Brandon's girlfriend, Ladessa, bore the worst of it. Online sleuths turned suspicion into sport. She issued statements, shared timelines, pleaded for kindness, and tried to explain what the rest of us never want to accept. Sometimes people just disappear. It doesn't always mean conspiracy. But it doesn't mean peace, either. Then, more than a decade later, on the 25th of December, 2024 Christmas Day, of all days, the Texas Department of Public Safety confirmed that human remains found near where Brandon disappeared had been positively identified as his. DNA matched. The search was over. The questions weren't. Cause of death? Undetermined. There were no obvious injuries, no conclusive wounds, no final message scrawled in dust or hidden in his truck, no sign of another person. Just skeletal remains near a fence line, discovered during a search by a private group, the kind of discovery that feels both like closure and like opening a second, deeper wound. His family buried him. People offered condolences. The forums quieted down. But none of it told the real story. Because now we know where he ended up. We still don't know why. Why did he make that 911 call? Why did he mention someone chasing him, someone bleeding, someone out here? Why didn't Kyle, who was within shouting distance, find him that night? Why did he vanish into terrain he knew, less than a football field away from the road? What scared Brandon Lawson more than being stranded? That's the part we still don't know, and maybe never will. The mystery remains suspended in the kind of place Texas specializes in, a vast middle of nowhere where reality bends and disappears between the blinking cell towers, where a voice crying out in the dark gets swallowed by static, where the horizon offers nothing but mirages, and time seems to stop until someone finds bones and still finds no answers. But then again, Texas has always had a strange relationship with its highways. You drive long enough, and they start to talk back. Not in words, exactly. In patterns, in absences, in headlights that vanish when you blink. And somewhere out there, in that same stretch of Coke County Road, the next disappearance was already loading. The name was different, but the question? The question was exactly the same. If you're still with us, and something tells me you are, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. These aren't stories that get tied up neatly, and we've got plenty more waiting in the dark. Also, let us know in the comments, where are you tuning in from? And what time is it right now? Because somewhere out there, someone's watching this at 2 a.m. Curtains drawn, lights off, and they're not alone. Caleb Harris. On the morning of the 4th of March, 2024, a 1-year-old student named Caleb Harris walked out of his apartment on the Texas A&M Corpus Christi campus and into the kind of quiet that usually means nothing. It was early, sometime around 3 a.m. His roommates were home. His phone was left behind. His keys were gone. But there was no note, no noise, and no indication that something was wrong. It was only after sunrise that anyone realized something was. Caleb wasn't the kind of person who just didn't show up. He had routines, a community. He was months from graduating. By all accounts, things were steady. Not perfect whose life is, but steady. And that morning, as the hours ticked on, that same steady foundation began to feel like it had never been real. Friends called, family drove in, campus security knocked. And when his roommates realized the front door had been unlocked for hours, they started to replay every detail of the night before. There weren't many. Caleb had come home from an outing with friends. He'd played some video games. He'd joked around, laughed. Nothing about it felt like a goodbye. And yet, by the time the next night rolled around, everything about it felt like a disappearance. By day 2, campus police were involved. By day 3, local media, flyers went up. Volunteers combed the shoreline. Canines were brought in. The school is located on Ward Island, a small sliver of land nestled into Corpus Christi Bay, scenic, quiet, and surprisingly isolated. In other words, the perfect place for questions to disappear. The apartment complex Caleb lived in was just steps from the water. Some speculated he may have gone for a walk, maybe to clear his head. Others thought about the nearby causeway, the bridge, the late-night drivers. But the problem wasn't what people thought. The problem was that nothing made sense. No video showed him leaving. No witnesses placed him anywhere. And then came the detail that twisted everything further. Caleb had left his phone. For a 1-year-old college student in 2024, that was almost unthinkable. No phone meant no location data, no pings, no texts to analyze, no timeline to reconstruct. It also meant no way to call for help, assuming he'd needed to. Then came the waiting. Weeks passed. Updates slowed. His family did what families always do in these cases. They stayed loud. They organized searches. They talked to media. They refused to let Caleb become another missing face in a long database of missing persons. But slowly, inevitably, the noise dulled. Corpus Christi went back to its saltwater breeze in spring semester. And somewhere, just beneath the surface of the ordinary, Caleb Harris remained missing. Until July 2024. That's when searchers made a discovery. Human remains in a coastal area just off the bay, not far from the Texas A&M campus. DNA testing would later confirm they belonged to Caleb. But the answers people had hoped for didn't follow. The remains were partial, weathered. There were no clear signs of what had happened. And then, in December, months after the first discovery, more of Caleb's remains were found in a separate location. Not far, but far enough to raise new questions. Why weren't they together? What had happened between those 2 points? And the most Texas question of all, how can someone just disappear in the open? Authorities offered statements, manner of death still undetermined. No foul play confirmed. The investigation remains ongoing. But behind those phrases sat a quieter, more disturbing truth. Even with the body found, the mystery didn't shrink. It got bigger. And as it expanded, so did the possibilities. Had Caleb wandered into the brush that night? Injured? Disoriented? Had someone lured him outside? Was there an encounter? A mistake? A cover-up? Everyone has a theory, but none of them reach the shoreline. The facts just dissolve in the tide. There's something uniquely cruel about mysteries that almost resolve. When someone vanishes without a trace, it's horrifying but clean, a perfect unknown. But when the traces come back months later, scattered and incomplete, the horror sharpens. You're left holding fragments, bones without cause, facts without meaning, closure without clarity. And maybe that's the real lesson of Caleb Harris's case. Resolution isn't the same as understanding. It's just a new kind of silence. His family still speaks for him. Their interviews are measured, respectful, determined. They want answers, not attention. But what they have for now is a space where a person used to be, filled with official statements and unofficial sorrow. the kind that stretches from dorm room hallways to university parking lots to the long, unlit stretches of the Texas coast. They buried Caleb, but they didn't bury the mystery. They couldn't. It's still there, flickering in campus lights, caught in the bay winds, staring back from a case file that ends not with a period, but with ellipses. A body was found. But the truth, whatever it is still out there, somewhere between the water and the dark. And just down the road or up the highway, or through another set of back roads forgotten by GPS, another man was about to vanish. Too. This one had been gone longer. Years, in fact. And when they finally found him, the answers didn't come either. They just circled back into more questions. Cole Middleton. In 2015, a man named Cole Middleton vanished from Gatesville, Texas, without spectacle, headlines, or even much public panic. That might sound strange, until you realize how ordinary Cole seemed, a quiet figure in a quiet place. One of those people the world assumes will always be there until they're not. He wasn't a celebrity. He didn't have a dramatic past. He wasn't the type of person you'd expect to see on a missing persons flyer, let alone become the subject of statewide searches. And yet for 9 years, no one could say what happened to him. Cole was a rancher by trade. Gatesville is the kind of town where that still means something. Tucked in central Texas, halfway between Waco and Killeen, it's a place where the land is more permanent than the people. Cole was part of that land, known for his work ethic, his love for animals, and his almost stubborn independence. He worked long hours, spent more time with livestock than humans, and seemed to prefer it that way. So when he stopped answering calls in 2015, most folks assumed he was off the grid on purpose. Maybe he'd gone out to check fencing and forgot his phone. Maybe he was fixing a water line. Or maybe, like a lot of rural Texans, he just didn't feel like talking. But then a day turned into 2, then a week, and slowly, quietly, the reality began to settle in. Cole Middleton was gone. His family filed a missing persons report. Deputies visited the property. There were no signs of forced entry, no sign of a struggle. His vehicle was still there. So were his tools, his gear, his ranch dog. The house looked like someone had simply stepped outside and never stepped back in. And that's exactly what it was. The local sheriff's department launched an investigation, but it didn't go far. Leads were scarce. Tips were vague. Most of the evidence was absence of Cole, of explanation, of closure. Rumors filled the gap, as they tend to in small towns. Some believed he'd run off to start a new life. Others whispered darker things, that he'd been caught in something he couldn't talk about. A land dispute maybe, a wrong deal, but none of it stuck. And for 9 years, the mystery of Cole Middleton remained unsolved and largely unspoken. Until 2024. That was when the news broke. Human remains had been discovered near his old property. Testing confirmed what few dared to say out loud anymore: it was Cole. Just like that, the case was closed. Except, of course, it wasn't. The announcement came without detail. Just a line in a press release. Remains confirmed. Investigation pending. No foul play officially determined. And in that silence, a new version of the mystery began to unfold. Not just where he had gone, but why it took so long to find him. The thing about Gatesville is that it has plenty of places to hide. Not just physically, though. The woods, creeks, and sprawling ranches would make it easy for even trained search teams to miss something, but culturally, it's the kind of place where people don't ask too many questions if they think it's none of their business. Where privacy isn't just respected, it's protected. So maybe it's no surprise that Cole could be missing for nearly a decade in plain sight, or at least plain geography. Maybe he really had just walked into the woods one day and never returned. Maybe a fall, a sudden health crisis, an accident with no one around to see it. Or maybe someone saw more than they ever said. The truth, as always in these cases, is just another shadow waiting at the edge of someone's memory. His family grieved twice. Once for the loss, again for the mystery. They buried what was left of him, held a service, and shared memories of the man he was: gentle, quiet, loyal. And yet, no one could ignore the questions. Why now? Why here? Why not sooner? If he had been so close to home all along, what had kept the truth hidden? And maybe more unsettling than that, what else is still hidden in those same hills? Because if someone like Cole Middleton can vanish for 9 years, with no trail, no suspects, no answers, then it raises a darker possibility. Maybe it's not just about how people disappear in Texas. Maybe the land helps them stay gone. There are places where the ground itself seems to erase footprints, where creeks change course, where deer trails mimic human paths, where fences fall and trees reclaim what once was open. And if you stand quiet long enough in Gatesville, the silence starts to feel heavy, not empty, but full of things unspoken. Cole's story didn't end with his discovery. It just changed shape. Now he's no longer a missing person. He's a found one, with no explanation, no resolution, and no answers that feel complete. His name was finally taken off the list, but the list itself? Still growing. And somewhere, just a few counties away, another young woman would soon walk out of work late at night, just like Cole once did, never to return. Her car would be found, her shift would be over. But like always in Texas, the story would only be getting started. Tara Breckenridge. In the hot Houston summer of 1992, 3-year-old Tara Breckenridge walked out of work and into a mystery that still hasn't cooled off, even 3 decades later. She was last seen leaving the men's club where she worked a quiet goodbye to a coworker. A shift ended, a routine walk to her car. She was supposed to head home. She never made it. Her red Toyota MR2 was discovered hours later, abandoned on the shoulder of the highway. Doors locked, purse inside, keys missing. No damage, no flat tire, no explanation. It was parked the way someone might if they were stepping out for a minute, except no one ever saw her step out, and no one ever saw her again. Tara wasn't a drifter. She had a boyfriend, a job, a family that cared about her. She was working nights at the club to support herself while studying photography, a profession she had a quiet passion for. She didn't live recklessly, though the job sometimes came with assumptions. It's easy to let that kind of detail cloud a case. But the truth is, she had plans. She was saving money. She was trying to build something, and then one night, it all evaporated into the Texas air. Her boyfriend at the time, a man named Wayne, said she never came home. He was the one who filed the missing persons report. His story was straightforward. He was waiting. She was late. He grew concerned. But even that simple version of events didn't sit right with everyone. Some said there were tensions in the relationship. Others said Tara had been planning to leave him. Still, rumors are not evidence, and suspicion is not proof. Houston police opened a case. They canvassed the area. They checked the club, interviewed coworkers. Everyone agreed on the basics. She was quiet, kind, private. No enemies, no debts, no signs of distress. No reason to just walk away. And no pattern of risky behavior that might explain her disappearance as a lifestyle gone wrong. This wasn't a person hiding from the world. This was someone who got swallowed by it. Over the years, various theories have been floated. That she met someone in the parking lot willingly or not. That she was followed home. That someone offered help she didn't need. There's a stretch of highway in Houston that seems to catch stories like this, unsolved, unnerving, unfinished. Her car was left just north of that invisible line. One idea that's always hovered near the case is that Tara knew the person who took her, if anyone took her at all. Her car showed no signs of distress. There were no scratch marks, no blood, no broken glass. It wasn't ransacked, it wasn't stripped, it wasn't even hidden, just left. Almost like whoever left it wanted it found and wanted it to raise questions. But the more questions you ask, the less clear things become. The case grew cold. Leads dried up. Her name faded from the front page. The only thing that stayed was the silence. Her family, especially her mother, never stopped pushing. They gave interviews, kept her story alive. But decades later, they still don't know what happened after Tara stepped into the parking lot and vanished into the noise of the city. Sometimes, late at night, when traffic quiets down and the skyline pulses in orange and blue, you can almost imagine her walking beside her car, the heat rising from the pavement, the thump of a distant bass line, the feeling that someone is watching or maybe waiting. It's the kind of city where a single wrong turn can take you out of view forever. And that's the part that never leaves. How normal it all seemed. She didn't go missing in the middle of nowhere. She wasn't hiking alone. She wasn't in a dangerous part of town. She was leaving work. A 5-minute drive home. No red flags. No warning signs. Just a young woman trying to build a life. And then a space where her name used to be. The case remains open, in theory. Every now and then, a detective gets assigned, digs through the file, makes a few calls. There's always the hope that someone will confess, that some scrap of evidence will surface, that time will do what memory hasn't. But in reality, this case, like so many others, floats in that space between public memory and private grief. You can picture her camera still sitting on a shelf somewhere, untouched, a roll of film undeveloped, a frame never filled. And across Texas, the echoes of these disappearances form their own pattern, invisible, untraceable, but consistent. Women who leave work and vanish, men who step out and are never seen again, kids who go to the store and never come home, not connected by a killer, not tied to a theory, just a pattern made of absence. And soon, the story of another young girl, barely a teenager, would unfold in a different corner of Texas. A case that was cold before it even started. And somehow, 4 decades later, it's still waiting for the first real clue. Roxanne Paltauf. On the evening of the 7th of July, 2006, Roxanne Paltauf, 18 years old and still figuring out who she was, walked out the door of an inexpensive motel room in North Austin, Texas, and vanished into the summer night. She left behind her purse, her ID, and the guy she'd been arguing with. She did not take her cell phone. She did not leave a note. The motel clerk remembered her stepping out into the dark. That's all anyone knows for sure. The room was rented under a false name. That detail doesn't always get mentioned first, but it should, because it hints at a shadow already in motion, a decision, or maybe just a habit, that feels wrong when you look at it in hindsight. Roxanne wasn't alone. She had checked in with her boyfriend, a man several years older than her. Their relationship was, by most accounts, volatile, equal parts dependence and discomfort. There were arguments, allegations, long reconciliations that didn't last, and on that night, they fought again. She left on foot, into the humid night air, into an area of town that doesn't close its eyes, even at 9 p.m. strip malls, neon-lit corners, traffic humming low. Not unsafe, not safe, just anonymous enough to swallow someone whole. The kind of place where the sidewalk doesn't ask questions. Roxanne walked out angry. She never walked back in. When she didn't call, her family knew something was wrong. Roxanne was close with her mother. She called often. She wasn't the type to vanish without a word. She had younger siblings who looked up to her, dreams of finishing school, a complicated but hopeful future, the kind that felt more like a starting point than an ending. Her mother filed a missing persons report almost immediately, but police didn't jump. They rarely do when an adult walks away after a fight, especially when the adult is legally of age, involved in a rocky relationship, and checking into motels under assumed names. It was too easy to assume she'd be back, that she'd cool off, that she was blowing off steam, that she'd call home in a day or two. But she didn't. Then came the strange movements. The phone number on her account, the one registered to her, started getting used in odd ways. Calls made, texts sent. Her phone pinged in areas Roxanne had never mentioned. And at some point, her cell phone stopped working altogether. It wasn't lost. It was turned off. On purpose. The boyfriend's story changed over time. At first, he said she walked out during the argument. Then he said she might have left with someone. Then he said he looked for her but couldn't find her. He was never charged with anything related to her disappearance, but his name never left the air around the case. There were sightings, of course. There always are. A girl who looked like Roxanne spotted at a gas station, another one at a bus stop, but none of them panned out. Tips came in from across Texas, some from people who swore they recognized her, others from people who seemed more interested in being part of something than actually helping. Each time, her family would follow the lead. Each time, it would disappear back into the noise. Years passed. Her face was added to the national registries. Age-progressed photos were created, awkward renderings that never quite capture the spark behind a real smile. News outlets ran anniversary pieces. The case moved from the active file to the cold case drawer, a folder among many. But her mother never stopped. She carried flyers in her car, kept the same phone number in case Roxanne ever called, appeared in interviews with the same quiet pain that only mothers of missing children know how to wear. She didn't chase fame. She chased facts, or at least slivers of them. And what remains today is a ghost story in a city that doesn't believe in ghosts. A girl who walked out of a motel room and left behind a trail so faint you almost wonder if she walked into a different dimension. But no, she walked into Austin, a city full of music, people, headlights, and shadows. And in that city, a person can still vanish in the space between one heartbeat and the next. No wreck, no scream, no final phone call, just a moment. And then, the long, slow ache of time stretching forward without her. The official file still labels her as missing. But what's missing isn't just Roxanne, it's the moment something happened. The moment someone else, maybe watching from just out of view, made a decision that rewrote her life and everyone else's around it. And as her name fades from headlines and floats into case summaries and archived interviews, another girl's name rises, one who went out jogging in a neighborhood that was supposed to be safe, another young woman, another summer day, another story that never quite arrives at the end. Rachel Louise Cook. In January 2002, 9-year-old Rachel Louise Cook went out for a morning jog and never returned. The day was bright and cool, the kind of Texas winter morning that fools you into thinking spring is closer than it is. Rachel was home from college for the holidays, visiting her parents in the small town of Georgetown, just north of Austin. It was the tail end of her break, and she'd soon be heading back to San Diego, back to school, back to routine. But that morning, nothing about her routine returned to her. She went out for a run, sometime around 9 a.m. Her father had seen her. They exchanged a few words before she headed out. She wore a gray shirt, shorts, running shoes, and carried a yellow Walkman. She wasn't running far, just a few loops through the familiar neighborhood she'd grown up in. No need for fanfare, no need for plans. It was home, and home was supposed to be safe. The next time someone saw her, it wasn't her. It was her mother, returning from work to find Rachel's belongings still untouched. No sign that she'd come back. The family quickly realized something was wrong. Rachel never missed plans. She wasn't the type to wander without a word. Calls were made, neighbors asked, and before the sun went down, Rachel was reported missing. Search efforts began almost immediately. The neighborhood was canvassed, helicopters were brought in, police knocked on every door within walking distance. Her route, while routine, suddenly became a crime scene, with no crime, just absence, no dropped keys, no shredded clothing, no shattered phone, just a jogger who had gone out and didn't come back. There were reports of a suspicious vehicle, a white Camaro or Trans Am, spotted near the area that morning. Someone said a man had pulled over and spoken to a young woman matching Rachel's description. Another said she was seen talking to someone near a mailbox, but no tip ever hardened into fact. The car was never found, the man was never identified, and Rachel? She seemed to vanish somewhere between two houses, in the middle of a morning run, under a blue sky. It doesn't make sense, and maybe that's the point. Rachel was the kind of person whose disappearance stung on contact. Articulate, funny, driven, familiar. She was one of those faces you see in a crowd and remember later for no reason. A little edgy, a little sarcastic, smart enough to be dangerous in a debate. Her friends described her as magnetic. Her family said she had plans, real ones. She wanted to study psychology. Maybe become a counselor. She'd just gotten a new tattoo. She was deciding who she wanted to be, and then she was gone. The investigation continued, but slowly. For years, it moved in loops. Leads appeared and disappeared. Suspects came and went. One man already in prison for other crimes even confessed. He claimed he'd picked Rachel up, that things had gone bad, that he knew where she was. But the details didn't line up. The confession collapsed. And just like that, the investigators were back at zero. The FBI put up a reward. Billboards went up. Her family spoke at press conferences, taped flyers to storefronts, and held candlelight vigils that never really ended, just got quieter. But the silence around the case didn't stay polite. Over time, frustration set in. Georgetown is not a big city. There were no forests to vanish into, no highways close enough for a quick getaway. Rachel disappeared in broad daylight, surrounded by homes, with people awake, windows open, cars parked, dogs barking. And yet no one saw what happened. No camera caught a thing. No neighbor remembered enough. The geography didn't protect her. It swallowed her. And in a strange, uncomfortable twist, the safest seeming stories are often the most unsettling. Because Rachel's story wasn't about a girl in a bad situation, or a place with a reputation, or a history of violence. It was about a girl who went for a jog and disappeared in the middle of an American dream. No warning, no hint, just gone. Her parents have lived inside that silence for over 2 decades. And like many families in this series of disappearances, they live in 2 timelines. The one where Rachel comes home, and the one where she never does. Everything else is just a loop. A rerun of the same day with different questions and fewer answers. People say time heals, but when the wound is a mystery, time just preserves it. Rachel's case remains open, unsolved, and full of contradictions. She was last seen on a run, but maybe the real chase started after. And somewhere in Texas, that chase is still happening. Only now it's for a different name, a younger face, someone even smaller. Because the next person to disappear didn't have time to grow up. She didn't get to run. She didn't even make it out of the front seat. Still here? Thought so. These stories have a way of pulling you in and not letting go. If you haven't already, subscribe. We do this often, and it only gets stranger from here. And while you're at it, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Because somewhere, it's late, and the silence outside your window might not be empty. Amber Nicole Crum. Dallas, Texas. The 26th of December, 1983. The day after Christmas. A city caught between holiday hangovers and a return to routine. Lights still twinkling in windows, plastic Santas still slumped in yards. The kind of day when nothing's really happening, and yet, for one family in East Dallas, everything stopped. 2-year-old Amber Crum was left in a pickup truck outside a convenience store while her mother went inside. Just a quick errand. Just a couple of minutes. One of those mundane, forgettable moments that aren't supposed to turn into anything. The kind of moment people make thousands of times every day. But when Amber's mother came back, the truck was empty. No sound, no witnesses, no Amber. What followed was one of the most haunting and enduring child disappearance cases in Texas history. Not because of what we know, but because of how little we do. The vanishing of a toddler in broad daylight, in a public place, with no one stepping forward, no answers emerging, and no one ever charged. To understand the magnitude of this kind of mystery, you have to understand the scale of time that swallows it. Amber was a baby still in diapers, still speaking in half words, still dependent on the hands that carried her. And for every year that passed, the memory of her shrank in detail, while the weight of her absence grew larger. That's how child disappearances work. They get heavier, not lighter. The original investigation was, at best, uneven. Some would say mishandled. The early 1982nd were not a golden era for missing persons protocols. There was no Amber Alert, yet ironic, considering the name. There were no cell phones, no surveillance cameras on every corner, no DNA databases. Police searched the area, questioned bystanders, and soon found themselves chasing a story that seemed to rewrite itself every few hours. The version of events changed. Some reports suggested that Amber was left in the truck alone. Others hinted that there were additional people in the vehicle. At one point, attention focused on a man who had been seen at the store around the time Amber disappeared. He was questioned, scrutinized, but never arrested. There was talk of custody issues, family tensions, possible neglect, but none of that led to Amber. The case hung in limbo. Flyers went up, then down. Tips came in, then dried up. The neighborhood, rough around the edges even back then, moved on. But the Crum family never really did. They couldn't. Amber's mother appeared in interviews over the years, weary, defensive, still hoping, still insisting, still staring into a camera lens trying to rewind time. But the details, the hard, forensic kind, never sharpened. Her photo became one of those haunting staples of missing persons registries, the smiling toddler in a dress too big for her, the faint look of curiosity in her eyes, the innocence frozen in a Polaroid that never aged. As the decades wore on, her image was digitally progressed, aged into approximations of who she might be at 10, 15, 25. But no face ever matched. No match ever turned into a lead. And so the question stayed. How does a child vanish from a vehicle in public without a trace? The answer, or maybe the lack of one, says more about us than about Amber. Because sometimes it's not that the mystery is impossible to solve, it's that it becomes too easy to forget. The public moved on. The headlines quieted. The photo aged out of the milk cartons. But behind closed doors, her absence never softened. Not for her family, not for the investigators who still carry her file, and certainly not for the neighborhood where a toddler vanished and nobody saw. The store eventually changed hands. The truck, long gone. Even the landscape looks different now. Strip malls paved over, parking lots repainted, new families moving in with no memory of the girl who vanished from that spot. But the question lingers, like heat rising off the blacktop. Where did Amber go? No signs of struggle, no ransom note, no goodbye, just a gap. And Texas has always had gaps like this, holes in its timeline that can't be paved over. Amber Crum is one of them. A reminder that not every ghost story starts in the woods or in some desolate corner of a forgotten highway. Sometimes it starts on a sidewalk, outside a store, on a day that was supposed to be normal. And somewhere else in the state, in a quieter town not far from Lockhart, another child, this time with his father, would vanish under even stranger circumstances. This one didn't end in an empty truck. It ended in something far worse. A murder scene with 2 people missing, and no one willing to say why. Chance and Lee Wackerhagen. It was a week before Christmas in 1993, when 9-year-old Lee Wackerhagen and his father, Chance, disappeared from their small home in McMahan, Texas, a tiny community near Lockhart, the kind of place that only has one post office and more cows than people. There wasn't a warning, there wasn't a goodbye. Just a shotgun left behind, an empty house, and a silence that stretched all the way into a murder scene. The story begins with Latricia White. She was 38, a nurse, and in a relationship with Chance. They lived together in Latricia's mobile home, just a few minutes off Highway 86. She'd spent the weekend before her death with Chance and his son Lee, who was visiting for the holidays. The three had gone out for burgers, watched television, wrapped presents, ordinary things. By all accounts, things were fine, until they weren't Reezer. On the 17th of December, Latricia didn't show up for her shift at the hospital. Calls went unanswered. A coworker stopped by her house and saw her car in the driveway, but no one came to the door. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. When authorities entered the home, they found Latricia dead, shot multiple times while she was sleeping. The scene was brutal, clinical, and, most importantly, missing two people, Chance and Lee. The natural assumption followed. If someone is found murdered in a home and two others are missing, they're not missing, they're wanted. For weeks, law enforcement operated under that assumption. They issued warrants, flyers went up, bulletins were circulated across Texas and into neighboring states. The public was told to look for Chance Wackerhagen and his son, that he might be armed, that he might be dangerous, that the child may be in danger, or worse. But the problem with assumptions is that they age poorly. Time passed, and no trace of Chance or Lee surfaced. No vehicle, no credit card trail, no sightings. The car he was believed to be driving, Latricia's Mazda, turned up 2 days later, abandoned near a tiny airstrip in the town of La Prairie, about 250 miles southwest. The keys were in the ignition. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just a vehicle, parked with quiet finality in a town with no connection to the people involved. There were rumors, of course, that Chance had snapped, that he'd killed Latricia in a moment of rage and fled with Lee, that maybe he'd driven into Mexico, maybe he had help, maybe they'd started over under new names. But those were just maybes. The facts didn't quite fit. Chance wasn't known to be violent. He had no criminal record, no diagnosed mental illness, no history of erratic behavior. He loved his son. Everyone agreed on that, even Latricia's family. And then there was this detail. Christmas presents for Lee were found unopened in the house, carefully wrapped, labeled in handwriting that hadn't expected to die. If Chance had planned this, why bother wrapping gifts? And then, years later, it got even weirder. In 1996, 3 years after the murder, Chance's parents received a phone call. On the other end was a young boy's voice. "Grandpa?" he said. Then the line went dead. Was it a prank? A mistake? A ghost in the machine? No one knows. The number couldn't be traced. There was no follow-up. Just a 3-second echo of something lost. Years passed. Investigators aged out. The case grew colder. Latricia's family grieved and demanded justice. Chance's family insisted he was being framed by circumstance. Lee's name slowly faded into the back pages of cold case directories. And yet, the 3 names remained chained together, 1 dead, 2 missing, none explained. And here's the contradiction at the heart of it. The murder is a fact. Latricia was killed. It happened. There's a crime scene. There's a body. There's evidence. But the people you'd expect to interrogate, to charge, to hold accountable, they vanished, as if someone tore the middle chapter out of a story and left the rest for readers to guess. Maybe Chance was a killer. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he ran. Maybe someone else did and took both of them with them. Maybe it was one of those small-town secrets that everyone kind of knows, but no one ever says. Or maybe, And this is the part that haunts people. Maybe both Chance and Lee met the same fate as Latricia, just in a different place, just far enough away to keep them out of reach. The sheriff's office has never officially cleared Chance. And yet, the further time drifts from 1993, the more likely it seems that the case is missing not just answers, but all its main characters. No justice, no bodies, no truth. Just a dead woman, a father and son with footprints that vanish in the Texas dirt, and a holiday season that, for 3 families, has never really ended. But the calendar kept turning, and as 1986 approached in another Texas town, another young woman barely out of her teens would leave work for the last time. Her case wouldn't begin with a missing person. It would begin with fear, with confessions, with arrests. But still, it would end the same way, with no body and no peace. Shelley Sykes. May 24, 1986. Galveston County. It was the kind of humid, restless night that doesn't cool down. It just sits on your skin, thick and heavy, waiting for something to go wrong. Shelley Kathleen Sykes, 19 years old, was driving home from her job at a clothing store in Galveston, heading toward her parents' house in Texas City. She never made it there. She called her boyfriend just before leaving work, telling him she was on the way. He waited for her. Minutes passed, then an hour. He drove her usual route, checking the roads. Then, near the edge of a desolate stretch between Galveston and Texas City, there it was, her car, abandoned. Shelley's gray Ford Mustang had been found on the side of the road, its tires stuck in the sand along a dark, isolated curve. The driver's door was ajar. Her belongings were still inside. One shoe, her purse, her keys, but no Shelley, not a trace, not even a footprint in the sand. The scene didn't make sense. It wasn't staged. It wasn't clean. It was as if someone had reached into the moving frame of her life and paused it right there, mid-breath, mid-decision, and simply edited her out. The investigation launched quickly. This wasn't someone prone to disappearing. Shelley had plans. She had people waiting. She wasn't angry. She wasn't running. She was just heading home. And then she wasn't. At first, the leads came slowly. A vehicle here. A man spotted there. The usual noise. But in 1987, almost exactly 1 year later, the case took a turn. A man named John Robert King, serving time in another county, began talking. First vague things, then names, then specifics. He named Gerald Peters Warst as his accomplice. He said the two of them had been driving around that night, drunk and looking for something. Shelley had been alone, broken down, vulnerable. He claimed they pulled over, and then everything unraveled. King described the scene in disturbing detail enough to convince authorities that he knew more than he should, enough to prompt the search of several rural properties and remote fields. Enough to convince a grand jury to indict both men. In 1988, the two were tried and convicted, not for Shelley's murder, but for aggravated kidnapping and aggravated sexual assault. They got life sentences, but not the truth, because despite the confessions, the maps drawn, the diagrams made, the tearful pleas, Shelley's body has never been found. That's the part that lingers. Not just the absence, but the contradiction. 2 men are in prison for what they did to Shelley Sykes, and yet her parents still visit an empty grave. They still keep a chair unfilled. They still answer the same question every year. Have they found her yet? Number. They haven't. King later tried to offer a deal, he'd tell investigators, where Shelley was buried in exchange for a reduced sentence. Prosecutors refused. The tip led nowhere. Just more brush, more dirt, more silence. By then, the terrain had changed. Buildings went up. Roads got widened. What was once rural turned suburban, and the places she may have been left became harder and harder to read. The Sykes family has never stopped searching. They've walked through fields, driven back roads, followed every rumor, every anonymous tip, every late-night phone call from a block number. Nothing has led them home. And so the case exists in this strange limbo, legally solved, emotionally unfinished. Justice was served, but not fulfilled. The men who hurt her are behind bars, but she is still gone, unrecovered, unreturned. The location of Shelley Sykes has become a kind of shared wound in Galveston County. People still remember the flyers, her yearbook photo, the curve in the road where her car was found. Some drivers avoid it, others slow down. No one talks about it out loud, but the silence speaks. Every year, around the anniversary, her name briefly returns to local news. A reminder, a loose thread, a story with a final chapter missing, the same face, the same questions, the same emptiness behind them. Sometimes, it's not that there are no answers, it's that the answers only go halfway. You can convict the guilty, you can fill in timelines, you can prove someone was taken. But if you don't bring her home, it doesn't matter. Not really. Not to the people who mattered most. Shelley's room was left untouched for years. Her car, the Mustang, was eventually released from evidence, but no one drove it again. Some things don't belong to time anymore. They belong to memory. And memory has no statute of limitations. And while her case was cracked open by a confession, the next story never even made it that far. No arrests, no names, no maps drawn in pencil, just another young woman who vanished from Fort Worth. A city that, by now, was starting to collect disappearances like postcards. Tiffany Johnson. In the fall of 2016, a young woman named Tiffany Johnson vanished from a quiet Fort Worth parking lot, right outside her apartment. She was 25 years old, vibrant, motivated, sharp, and by all accounts, ready to start a new chapter in her life. That night, it was already underway. She'd recently broken up with her boyfriend. She'd told her family she was done. She was moving on. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous part of a story, when a person decides to leave something behind. Tiffany had been living in a tucked-away apartment complex near the TCU campus, sharing the space with her twin brother. That night, her ex-boyfriend, Chris Reville, came by. According to witnesses, including her brother, the two were outside talking near her car. Nothing seemed especially alarming. There were no raised voices, no overt signs of distress. It was one of those low-lit, quiet moments that could have gone any number of ways. But what happened next was sudden. Tiffany vanished, just like that. One minute she was standing near her car. The next, she was gone. Not walked away, not stormed off, gone. Her phone, on the ground. Her shoe, left behind. Her keys, purse, and wallet, still inside her apartment. Chris, the ex-boyfriend, was still there, but now he was sitting in his car. When her brother realized she wasn't anywhere nearby and confronted Chris, something shifted. Chris said she walked off, just left. But her phone was still right there on the ground. The screen cracked, the case scuffed. It was like someone had tried to erase her, but forgot to erase the evidence. Police were called. Chris was questioned, but not immediately arrested. For a few hours, the world was still acting like this might be a misunderstanding, that maybe Tiffany had really just walked off. Maybe they'd argued, and she needed air. But that version only worked for a little while. The sun came up the next morning, and there was still no Tiffany. No call, no texts, no sign. And then it got worse. Police began to focus their attention on Chris Reville. They searched his car. Inside, they found items that didn't belong to him. Duct tape, zip ties, a blanket. A scent trail traced by search dogs from Tiffany's last known location led to his vehicle, and then stopped. A signal cut mid-sentence. Chris was arrested not for murder, not for kidnapping, but for unlawful restraint. It was the best the prosecution could do at the time. Tiffany was still technically a missing person. No body, no witness, just a void surrounded by implication. But this wasn't the first time Chris Reville had been connected to something like this. 8 years earlier, another ex-girlfriend of his had vanished under suspicious circumstances. Her name was Tony, and her story bore a chilling resemblance to Tiffany's. She had also ended things. She had also vanished. She had also left behind a trail that pointed only in one direction. Chris was questioned then, too, never charged. Now, with Tiffany missing, the past was back louder this time. Investigators believed they knew what had happened. They just couldn't prove it in full. For a while, there was hope that Chris might confess, that he'd lead them to where she was. Maybe in a moment of guilt, maybe to cut a deal. He didn't. Years passed. The case lingered. Chris stayed behind bars not for Tiffany's death, but for what they could prove. And Tiffany's family? They never stopped pushing. Her twin brother, in particular, turned his grief into resolve. He gave interviews, organized searches, talked to reporters with a kind of quiet fury that only someone who lost their other half could carry. Every so often, there'd be a new tip, a new field to search, a new rumor whispered by someone who knew someone else. But no Tiffany. Her story became part of Fort Worth's long shadow, a case that is technically solved, but still unsolved in every way that matters. Everyone knows what happened. No one can say where she is. And maybe that's what makes her story linger the way it does. It isn't the mystery itself. It's the denial of closure. It's the feeling of being so close to an answer that you can taste it and never being allowed to swallow it. The system says justice was served. The family knows it wasn't can. Not really. Because Tiffany Johnson is still missing. Her body has never been found. Her name has never been moved to the final column. And until that happens, the story isn't over. It just keeps looping. Every time someone says, "Did they ever find her?" Number not yet. And while her case remains cold in files but burning in the minds of those who loved her, another woman on another quiet Texas road, west of Lubbock, was getting into a car for the last time. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't running. She thought she was going home. But instead, she vanished into flat land and radio static and left behind only dust. Megan Hembry. It was the 26th of February, 2013, a dry, restless evening on the edge of Smyre, Texas, a place that doesn't exactly show up in bold on most maps. A few hundred people, open land, power lines stretching across cotton fields like scribbled signatures in the sky. Nothing ever really happens there, until it does. That evening, Megan Hembry, 30 years old, vibrant, sharp-tongued, and always in motion, stepped into her red two-door Saturn to make what should have been a routine 10-minute drive. She was never seen again. Megan was headed to a friend's house in nearby Lubbock. She said she'd be right back, told her family she'd only be gone for a little while. She left around 6 p.m. The sun was starting to dip, the West Texas light fading into that kind of golden haze that makes everything look like a memory. The drive was short, one of those stretches where you don't even think to text "made it" at the end. She never made it to her destination, and she never came home. By the next morning, her family knew something was wrong. Megan wasn't the kind of person to just fall off the map. She had a young son, a 3-year-old boy she adored. She was a single mom with a rhythm to her life, the kind that leaves behind predictable footprints, phone calls, check-ins, the daily rituals of responsibility. So when she didn't respond to texts, didn't call, didn't return, the alarm started ringing. The last person known to see Megan was a man named Pete, someone she'd been spending time with, casually, inconsistently. Not a boyfriend, but something less than a stranger. She'd told others she didn't trust him completely, said he gave her a bad feeling, but she still got in the car that night, People always think they'll be fine, that whatever bad energy they're sensing is just nerves. Until it isn't. Pete said she'd left his place around 7 p.m., that she drove off on her own. That was it. End of story. He had nothing more to offer. But Megan's car never made it to Lubbock. It didn't make it anywhere. For days, nothing. Then a break, sort of. Her red Saturn was found abandoned, miles away from where it should have been, sitting on a dusty roadside, like it had been dropped from the sky. Locked. No blood. No sign of struggle. No Megan. But here's the detail that clings. Her purse was still in the car. Her ID. Her makeup. But her phone? Gone. The man who last saw her, Pete, was eventually arrested. But not for Megan's case. He was charged with unrelated crimes, some of them violent, all of them unsettling. But nothing stuck him to her disappearance with the kind of force law enforcement needed to prosecute. He didn't confess, he didn't crack, and no one could prove anything more than coincidence. The case stalled, and West Texas swallowed the story the way it swallows heat, slowly and without apology. Megan's family searched. They put up billboards, held vigils, drove the back roads themselves. Over time, her name started showing up on the kinds of flyers that linger on corkboards in rural gas stations and outdated Facebook pages. Missing mother of one. Last seen wearing blue jeans. Have you seen this car? The same questions, repeated with the same quiet desperation. And yet, nothing new. No remains, no eyewitnesses, no surveillance footage. Just the flat, open land of Lubbock County, too big to search fully, too silent to give anything back. That's what makes this one so cold. It's not that it went unsolved, it's that it barely even left a mark. Like she'd been lifted right out of the frame and erased with clean edges. No noise, no fight. Just dust and distance, and the kind of wind that erases tire tracks in under an hour. 10 years have passed. Her son is a teenager now. Old enough to ask questions, old enough to know the answers aren't coming. Her mother still gives interviews, eyes heavy with time, voice steady but fraying at the edges. She talks about Megan in the present tense, as if doing so might summon her back, or at least hold space for the possibility. Because in Texas, people don't just disappear. They get absorbed by land, by time, by silence, and sometimes by someone else's secrets. Megan Hembree's story doesn't end. It just narrows into a kind of mental scar carved into the side of a highway no one remembers the name of. And somewhere beyond that, then miles away, but not so different, another young man was driving alone on a dark Texas road. He never meant to become a mystery. But like so many before him, his story would end with a crash, a road, and no trace of where he went next. Jason Landry. It was the 13th of December, 2020, just before midnight, when Jason Landry, a 21-year-old college student, got into his car in San Marcos, Texas, and began the quiet drive home to Missouri City for the holidays. He had just finished his first semester at Texas State University, where he was studying sound recording technology. An artist, a thinker, a kid with a good head and a curious heart. He loved music, and even more than that, he loved home. The drive was supposed to take just under 3 hours, but Jason never made it past the first one. Around 12:30 a.m., his car was found crashed on a remote gravel road near the tiny town of Luling, a place you might miss if you blink at the wrong time. His Nissan Altima was facing the wrong direction, smashed into a tree. Not violently, not enough to suggest trauma, but it was clear something had gone wrong. The road he crashed on was Salt Flat Road, a lonesome path that forks off from the main highway like a broken thought. You don't end up there by mistake. But if you do, there's not much to find. The scene was strange. The headlights were still on. The driver's side door was open. Inside the car, they found Jason's wallet, his phone, his glasses. Outside, scattered on the road in a kind of breadcrumb trail leading away from the vehicle, were his clothes: shirt, pants, underwear, even his shoes. All neatly left behind like he'd stepped out of himself and kept walking. But where? And why? That's the mystery. Because no one has seen or heard from Jason Landry since. The timeline is painfully thin. He left his apartment at 11:30 p.m. His phone last pinged near Salt Flat Road around midnight. There were no calls, no texts, no signs of another vehicle. No signs of a chase. Just a straight drive that turned into a wreck and then into an erasure. Search teams descended on the area almost immediately. Volunteers, police, canine units, drones, helicopters, hundreds of hours spent walking every inch of the land around the crash site. They found a scent trail that led down the road, through a barbed wire fence, and into a field, and then nothing. It just stopped, like the ground itself had taken him in. There were theories, of course, that he got disoriented, that he was under the influence, that he'd crashed, panicked, stripped off his clothes, and wandered into the dark. Or maybe someone else was out there, someone who found him first. It's hard to say which version is more unsettling. The problem is, none of it answers the essential question, where did he go? Because the thing about Jason's disappearance is that it happened in a place that doesn't hide people well. Salt Flat Road isn't wilderness. It's open, scrubby, low brush, flat land, stretching for miles. If Jason had collapsed nearby, they would have found him. If he'd drowned, been injured, or fallen, there would have been evidence. But there wasn't. Just the wrecked car, the abandoned clothing, and then the long, uninterrupted silence of the land. His family didn't wait. They moved fast. Jason's father, a pastor, became the reluctant face of the search, speaking in interviews with that heavy calm that comes from both faith and fear. They organized searches, hired private investigators, pored over cell phone data, analyzed traffic camera footage, held prayer vigils and town halls and media events. Every effort was made. Nothing changed. No suspects, no body, no new leads, just an open field and a gap where a life used to be. And here's the part no one says out loud, but everyone thinks Jason should have been found. By all logic, all probability, he should have been discovered within the first 48 hours. But he wasn't. Not a trace, not a shoe print, not a call. That's not just strange. That's eerie. As if whatever happened out there wasn't entirely playing by the usual rules. Jason's case lives in that space between theories and gut feelings. Too grounded for conspiracy, too strange for common sense. It's a Texas mystery with just enough clues to keep you looking, and just enough emptiness to keep you guessing. Maybe he had an episode. Maybe he trusted the wrong person. Maybe something ancient and unknowable walked alongside him in the dark. No one knows, but people still ask. His family still waits. His photo still circulates. His Spotify playlists are still public, like digital echoes of someone paused mid-song. The sun still rises over Salt Flat Road. It lights up the gravel, the fences, the ghosts, but no one walks there barefoot anymore. Because Jason Landry was the kind of person who didn't just disappear. He was seen, loved, counted on. And yet one wrong turn, one wrong road, and he became another name on a long, strange list of Texans who left behind everything but answers. And a few years earlier, in a different part of Texas, another disappearance would begin not with a road or a car, but with a parking garage, a missing woman, a surveillance camera, and the kind of twist that would turn a cold case into a conviction, but not a conclusion. Christina Morris. The 30th of August, 2014. A hot, dense night in Plano, Texas. The kind of night where the heat doesn't lift. It just clings to your skin like a warning. Christina Morris, 23 years old, walked out of a parking garage at the Shops at Legacy, a trendy mixed-use maze of boutiques, bars, condos, and streetlights that never seemed to shut off. She wasn't alone, not yet. Surveillance footage showed her walking side by side with someone she knew, a friend, or something close to one. Then the cameras lost her. Then the silence started. She had been at a party earlier that evening, one of those casual gatherings that string together people from different parts of your life, old classmates, new acquaintances, people you know just well enough to trust, and sometimes just enough to regret it. Christina had plans, ambitions, a stubborn streak, but in the best way. She was starting a new job. She wanted to go back to school. She was thoughtful, measured, emotionally sharp, the kind of woman who noticed things. But in that moment, walking out of a parking garage in the early hours of morning, she either didn't notice what was coming or couldn't stop it. She never came home. Her car was found parked exactly where it should have been. Locked. No signs of damage. No indication that anything had gone wrong until you realized she wasn't the one who'd driven it there. Her phone stopped pinging shortly after she disappeared. Her wallet was gone. So was she. By Monday, her family knew something was off. She hadn't shown up for work. She hadn't contacted anyone. Her mother, Johnny, reported her missing. The Plano police opened a case. Flyers went up. But the longer Christina was gone, the harder it became to believe she had just left. She wasn't the kind to ghost her life. Something had happened. Then came the video. Surveillance footage showed her walking alongside Enrique Arochi, a former high school acquaintance, into the garage. The two appeared to be talking casually. Nothing aggressive. No signs of conflict. But what the footage didn't show was Christina leaving. Only Enrique's car driving out of the garage alone. Arochi said goodbye to her, he claimed. Said she went her own way, that she was fine, that he didn't know what happened next, but his story didn't hold. His car was seized and processed. Luminol testing revealed something hidden beneath the surface traces of blood in the trunk. The DNA matched Christina. Suddenly, this wasn't just a missing persons case. It was something darker. He was arrested and charged with aggravated kidnapping. During the trial, prosecutors laid out a narrative built mostly on implication. There was no footage of a crime, no smoking gun, just a gap in the timeline, a broken story, and a trunk that spoke louder than any alibi. He was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison. But Christina was still missing. Her family kept searching. They organized exhaustive efforts, combing wooded areas, checking cell tower maps, speaking to anyone who might have heard or seen something. Arochi never talked, never offered any deal. He maintained that he didn't know where she was, that he wasn't responsible, even as the facts closed in around him. For nearly 4 years, Christina remained a question without an answer. The kind of question that infects a family, that follows you into the grocery store, that keeps you from sleeping. That makes you listen for a knock at the door you don't really expect, but still prepare for every night. Then, in March 2018, a worker clearing brush in a field in Anna, Texas, nearly 40 miles from where Christina was last seen, came across human remains. There wasn't much left. But what remained was enough. DNA confirmed the worst. It was her. The field was remote, quiet, empty in the kind of way that makes you wonder how many other stories are buried just out of view. Her remains were scattered, exposed to years of heat and storms and slow forgetting. But even in death, Christina brought clarity. The case, once legally closed but emotionally raw, had found its brutal punctuation mark. Only it didn't feel like an ending. Her family laid her to rest. They spoke to the press. They thanked the community, but not the system. Because justice, if you can call it that, came too late, too fractured, and too conditional. Arochi is still in prison. He will likely remain there. But he never admitted guilt, never showed remorse, never gave them the thing they wanted most, an answer. Christina's case stands out because it should have been solved the moment she vanished. Cameras were everywhere, witnesses were plenty. A suspect was obvious. And yet it still took 4 years, 1 trial, and a field worker with a machete to find her. And that tells you everything you need to know about how fragile the concept of solved really is. And as Christina's family struggled to piece themselves back together, a few hundred miles away, another woman would vanish on the edge of a different Texas highway, leaving behind only a broken-down car, a club full of strangers, and a mystery that has only grown louder with time. Brandy Wells, the 3rd of August, 2006, a Thursday night in Longview, Texas. Hot, still. One of those summer nights where the world seems to pause, holding its breath between the week's end and the weekend's release. That night, Brandy Wells, 23 years old, newly separated, independent, proud, and carrying that particular weight of starting over, walked into a club called Graham Central Station. She was alone. She never walked out. Brandy had left her home in Tyler earlier that evening, telling her mother she was going out for a bit, maybe to clear her head, maybe to unwind. She was going to meet some friends, she said. She was trying to socialize more, trying to reclaim a little of herself after a rough patch. New city, new job, new everything. That kind of hard reset people make when they're tired of being defined by what happened to them. She never made it to the friends. She got to the club. Security cameras confirmed that much, but according to everyone questioned afterward, no one saw her leave. No one even remembered seeing her inside. No drink orders, no conversations, no group selfies, no late-night gossip about who said what. For someone who supposedly entered a crowded venue, she left no footprint at all. But her car did. It was found the next day not at the club, but on Interstate 20, about 1.5 miles from the exit to Longview, parked on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking, doors locked. The keys were missing. Her cell phone was gone. Her purse and ID were still in the vehicle. The driver's seat was pushed far back, uncomfortably far for Brandy, who was petite, and her gas tank? Empty. Inside the car was a single shoe. That detail lingered, the kind of thing you can't help fixating on, because a single shoe inside a locked car is one of those visual riddles that doesn't have a satisfying answer. Was she dragged? Did she leave in someone else's vehicle? Did she break down and accept a ride? If so, from who? And where did they go? The official search began quickly, but clarity never arrived. Dogs traced a scent a short distance from the car, then lost it in the high grass. No evidence of a struggle. No witnesses. No broken glass. No defensive wounds. Just a stalled vehicle in the middle of a hot Texas stretch of highway, and a young woman who had vanished without reason or trace. Her family was relentless. Brandy's mother, in particular, became the steady heartbeat behind the search organizing efforts, giving interviews, chasing every lead. She refused to let her daughter become another cold case file with a name and date and nothing in between. She kept asking the questions others stopped asking. Why would Brandy drive an hour to a club alone if she wasn't even planning to meet someone there? Why was her car found so far from the club? Why were the hazards on if there was no visible damage? And most haunting of all, why did no one see her leave? In the years that followed, theories multiplied. Some believed Brandy ran out of gas and started walking, possibly picked up by someone she trusted or someone she did not. Others suspected foul play inside the club itself, a confrontation, a misstep, an encounter that escalated in the parking lot. Then there were darker theories, a stalker, a setup, something orchestrated before she even got there. But the facts never changed. Brandy Wells was last seen walking into a club on a Thursday night in East Texas, and she never came back. Her car was left like a question on the side of a road, blinking into the dark. And every year since, the same sequence plays out. The anniversary approaches, the flyers reappear, and her name returns to the headlines for a moment before vanishing again. Her case sits at the crossroads of visibility and invisibility. A woman who disappeared in full view. A car that became a monument to what no one saw. There were cameras. There were people. There was traffic. And yet somehow, not one frame of footage, not one witness account, has moved the case forward in any meaningful way. And that's the part that leaves a scar. It wasn't supposed to be hard. There was a starting point, a location, a vehicle, a time. Brandy didn't vanish into the woods. She vanished into a system that can't hold on to people like her. A young woman, on the verge of rebuilding, swallowed not by wilderness, but by routine, a club, a road, a night. Somewhere, someone knows what happened to her. Maybe they've told someone. Maybe they haven't. Maybe the car on I-20 was the end. Or maybe it was just the handoff, the point where her story was taken out of her hands. And as that road kept stretching west, so did the pattern, because not far from Longview, years earlier, another Texas woman would go missing from her own backyard. And when her remains were found, they brought no comfort, only more questions, and the sense that whatever happened had been waiting right outside her door all along. Monica Rizzo. In the summer of 1997, the Rizzo family home in San Antonio, Texas, looked like any other modest suburban residence: weathered brick, a dry lawn fighting the heat, and a quiet stillness that didn't raise eyebrows. That was the illusion. The reality inside was something else, not immediately terrifying, but quietly strange and getting stranger by the day. Monica Rizzo, a 4-year-old mother of two, had not been seen by friends or coworkers since late May. She hadn't called in sick, hadn't quit, hadn't packed a bag. She just stopped showing up. At first, no one panicked. Maybe she needed a break. Maybe she was dealing with personal issues. She had been under some stress. People talked themselves out of sounding alarms because the alternative, the terrible possibility, always feels like overreaction. But weeks passed, then a month, and no one had heard from Monica. Her employer reported her missing in early June after repeated no-shows and no response. Her family, or what remained of it, claimed she was fine, that she'd simply taken off, that she was in contact, that she needed space. But something didn't add up. When police arrived at the Rizzo home, they were met by her husband, Leonard. He seemed unconcerned, said she was alive, well, and just didn't want to be found right now. A personal choice, nothing more. But the officers weren't buying it. The story didn't match the facts. Her car was still there, her bank account untouched. No phone calls, no letters, no signs of life. And the house, well, the house didn't feel like someone had just left for a break. It felt stalled, as if it was waiting for something else to happen. That's when the ground started talking. On the 5th of June, police began to search the Rizzo's backyard. The dirt was loose, disturbed. In some places, it looked freshly dug. In others, it looked like it had been filled in, uneven and haphazard, like someone had been in a hurry. At first, they found bones, small, fractured pieces. At first, they thought animal, maybe a pet, maybe several. But the bones kept coming. Dozens, then hundreds. Some burned, some broken, some too clean. Then came the forensic confirmation: human. The backyard of Monica Rizzo's house had become a graveyard. Only no one knew how many graves. The bones didn't come with names. They didn't come with order, just fragments. Remains of a person, or possibly more than one. Authorities never conclusively determined if the bones belonged solely to Monica, or if someone else had been buried there before or after her. They were found in separate clusters, as if someone had moved them around, reburied them, rearranged them like puzzle pieces they were trying to make unreadable. Leonard Rizzo was brought in for questioning, again and again. But he never confessed, never cracked, never said more than he had to. According to him, Monica had simply walked away. And everything found in the backyard? He had no idea, no explanation, no alarm. No charges were ever filed. That's the part that turns this story into something else. This wasn't a disappearance that dissolved into wilderness. This wasn't a stranger abduction or an accident on a dark road. This was a woman vanishing from inside her own home, her bones turning up in the dirt behind the porch, and no one held accountable. The official cause of death was never determined. The remains were too fragmented, too damaged, too incomplete. Police couldn't say how she died, or even definitively that she did. Her death certificate lists her as deceased, but the state never closed the book. The case remains open, technically a homicide investigation, but functionally a cold case. Her children grew up in the aftermath. One of them later spoke out, saying he always felt something was wrong, that the house had secrets, that the silence was too loud. And that backyard? It's since been turned over, resold, lived in by people who may or may not know the full history. And what does that say about how we handle stories like Monica Rizzo's? When the horror doesn't come from the shadows, but from a place called home. When the person who might know the truth sleeps just a few feet away from the buried evidence, when the neighborhood just nods, locks its doors, and mows its lawns like nothing ever happened, it says that some mysteries aren't lost, they're ignored. Monica didn't run away. She didn't leave her life behind. She left a trail of bones in the ground and a silence that law enforcement still can't break. And just a few years later, another woman, older, adventurous, out on an ordinary real estate errand, would vanish near the coast in broad daylight. A grown adult in a public place, gone without a trace, as if the state itself had developed a taste for vanishing points. Dorothy Tot Harriman. Tot Harriman was 57 years old when she went missing, but age had done nothing to dull her energy. She was one of those people who lived forward, decisive, independent, quick to laugh, quicker to correct you. In 2001, she was in the process of relocating from her longtime home in Kentucky to the sun-drenched suburbs of Texas, aiming to settle closer to her son in the Kama-Seabrook area near Galveston Bay. She had plans, a to-do list, a new chapter already unfolding in her mind. But on the morning of the 27th of July, during what should have been a simple house-hunting trip, Tot vanished from the map entirely. She was last seen in the Seabrook area, driving her silver 1996 Buick LeSabre, a car that was known, by all who loved her, to be about as practical as Tot herself, dependable, unflashy, built for long roads and routine errands. That morning, she told her son she was headed out to look at a few properties. She was excited, even upbeat. The move felt like progress, like purpose, but she never returned. The last confirmed sighting of her was vague at best. A woman matching her description was reportedly seen in a real estate office in nearby League City, inquiring about listings. That's where the trail stops. Her car disappeared with her. Her phone went silent. No banks were touched. No messages were left. And no one, absolutely no one, could say where she went next. At first, it didn't feel like a crisis. Tot was capable. She could handle herself. She was known to be resourceful, careful, and cautious. She wasn't the type to get lost. She didn't take unnecessary risks, but by the second day, concern gave way to dread. Her son reported her missing. Local law enforcement issued a bolo for her car. Flyers were printed, neighborhoods canvassed, roads checked for tire tracks or broken glass. Nothing. Days turned into weeks. Not a single confirmed sighting, not a single transaction, not even a car matching the make and model. It was as if she had driven off the earth. Her family refused to let her fade into the archive. They held press conferences, launched their own searches, hired private investigators, and refused to accept the thin shrug of law enforcement resources. But even as media coverage built, even as her story traveled across state lines, the investigation circled back to the same bleak premise. A woman disappeared on a sunny coastal morning in a populated area in her own car, and no one saw anything. What makes Todd Harriman's case uniquely haunting is how ordinary it all was. She wasn't traveling cross-country. She wasn't hiking remote trails or meeting strangers from a classified ad. She was going to look at houses, in daylight, in a suburb, near shopping centers, real estate offices, schools, the kind of errand tens of thousands of people do every day without thinking twice. But Tot never made it home, and neither did her Buick. There were theories, of course. Most of them bleak, all of them inconclusive. Some said she may have had a medical emergency and veered off the road, but no wreckage was ever found. No sign of impact, no roadside disturbance. Others floated darker ideas that she was abducted, that she was the victim of foul play by someone posing as a realtor, someone who knew how to vanish people without leaving evidence. But if that's the case, they left nothing behind, not even a fingerprint. Then there were the uncomfortable whispers, that maybe she chose to disappear, that she left of her own accord, staged it all. But that version withers quickly under scrutiny. Tot had family. A son she was moving to be near, a community she stayed in close contact with, a reputation for responsibility. The idea that she simply dropped her life like a bad habit and drove into oblivion doesn't hold water. Not with people who knew her. Not with the facts. And yet, the only thing that exists now is the absence. The kind that drifts behind closed doors and dinner conversations that end too soon. Her son kept the story alive. He worked tirelessly to keep her name in rotation, calling news stations, attending missing persons events, speaking with quiet exhaustion to anyone who would listen. But as years passed, and then decades, the case shifted from active to open, which in bureaucratic language often means forgotten. Tot Harriman became a ghost in the land of the living, not buried, not confirmed dead, not even allowed the dignity of a headline anniversary, just a question with no sentence around it. And somewhere, maybe in the same stretch of Gulf Coast land, or maybe in a different timeline altogether, another name waited to be erased. A young college student from decades past, last seen stepping out of a taxi in Denton. A woman whose story started long before missing became a word with its own vocabulary of grief. Virginia Carpenter. In June of 1948, the world was still adjusting to peace. World War II had ended just 3 years earlier, and a new kind of optimism hummed through small towns and city streets. But Denton, Texas, wasn't in a hurry. It remained its quiet, brick-faced self, a college town that leaned more on manners than mystery. That summer, the sidewalks buzzed with new graduates, war veterans re-entering civilian life, and women like Virginia Carpenter, 21 years old, sharp as a tack, independent, and at least by the era's standards, unusually bold. Virginia was making a move. She'd been accepted to Texas State College for Women, now Texas Women's University. She'd spent a few days at home in Texarkana and boarded a train to Denton on the 1st of June, carrying 2 suitcases, her future compressed into a few bags, and a hat that framed her smile like punctuation. When the train arrived in Denton late that night, a local taxi driver picked her up. He later told police she was cheerful, excited. They chatted. She gave directions to her dormitory, Brackenridge Hall, and asked him to wait while she went inside to check in. But she never came back. The taxi waited, engine humming in the dark. Then it drove away. Virginia Carpenter was never seen again. The case was one of the earliest missing persons stories to ripple across Texas in the post-war era, and it was strange from the beginning. According to the cab driver, she got out of the car near the dormitory, where 2 young men approached her and offered to help with her bags. The driver assumed they were students. Nothing seemed off. And so he waited for 10 minutes, then 15, then 30. He finally pulled away, figuring she'd found her way inside. But by the next morning, It was clear something had gone wrong. She never checked in. Her suitcases were never brought up. None of the dormitory residents had seen her. No one could confirm she ever made it through the front door. Virginia's disappearance launched one of the largest investigations the town had ever seen. The Texas Rangers got involved. Local volunteers searched campus grounds, nearby fields, and the surrounding roads. Her parents arrived from Texarkana, holding fast to the idea that there must be a mistake that she'd turn up, embarrassed, maybe confused, but unharmed. But Denton wasn't a city that swallowed people. It didn't have that kind of geography. It was all neighborhoods and churches and professors in tweed. The idea that a woman could vanish between the curb and a college door seemed absurd, and yet there was nothing to prove otherwise. The investigation spiraled in too many directions. Some believed she was taken by someone she knew. Others suggested she'd staged her own disappearance, though that theory collapsed under the weight of her unfinished plans and untouched bank account. She had no reason to run. She had every reason to stay. She wanted to study. She wanted to teach. She had recently broken off an engagement, yes, but not out of fear or scandal. Just clarity. She was building her life, not hiding from it. Over the years, every lead grew cold. No body, no note, no calls, no confirmed sightings. There were whispers that her ex-fiancé was questioned, but nothing ever stuck. The taxi driver remained the last known person to see her, and his story never changed even under pressure, even decades later. Eventually, her case became more than just a mystery. It became a reference point, the kind of story people in Denton passed down in fragments. "You know about that girl who disappeared on campus?" they'd say, as if it were a campfire tale, as if it didn't end with a mother holding on to silence for the rest of her life. Virginia Carpenter's photo remained on bulletin boards long after the paper curled and yellowed. A grainy black and white image of a young woman with a poised smile, her entire future contained in the space between train station and dorm room. That's all anyone had, a smile and a disappearance. And the longer it went unsolved, the more it shaped the way people saw the town. Denton, for all its charm, had a shadow now. One that never fully lifted, even after decades of new students, new buildings, new administrations. Because if Virginia Carpenter could disappear under the safety lights of a campus in 1948 without noise, without protest, without trace, then safety itself became a myth. Her case remains unsolved, officially. The dormitory is still there, remodeled and renamed. Generations of students have walked the same path she never finished. Some know her name. Most don't. But the ground remembers. And maybe that's why people still look over their shoulders when walking alone at night, even in the safest corners of campus. Some places just keep a piece of what they took. And as her story sank into the bones of Texas history, another young woman decades later would also take a walk. Not across campus, but to a bus stop. Same age, same vanishing point. Another life paused at the edge of routine. And once again, the question would come back, like clockwork. How does a girl just disappear? Alexandra Ali Lowitzer. Spring, Texas. The 26th of April, 2010. A Monday afternoon at the tail end of freshman year, that kind of day where everything feels boring, predictable, and vaguely hopeful. Alexandra Lowitzer, 16, known to her friends as Ali, had just gotten off the school bus. Her house was only a few doors down, but she wasn't headed inside yet. She told her mom earlier she wanted to walk to her after-school job at a local burger place. Just a short walk, less than a mile. Familiar neighborhood, bright daylight, nothing remarkable. She was never seen again. Ali wasn't the kind of teenager who invited chaos. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't secretive. She was, by most accounts, practical and introverted artistic, a little shy, but no less grounded than any other 16-year-old trying to sort out her identity. She wore dark clothes, listened to punk, wrote notes in journals she never showed anyone. She had dreams of becoming a tattoo artist. She liked order, disliked drama, and walked the same route to work often enough that it had become background noise. But something interrupted that route on the 26th of April, something no one saw. The first few hours after she failed to arrive at her job passed with confusion, not alarm. The restaurant assumed she hadn't shown up. Her mother assumed there'd been a miscommunication. She called Ali's phone. No answer. She sent texts. Nothing. That silence, at first just odd, became unbearable within hours. By evening, the realization landed. Ali wasn't just late. She was gone. Her family contacted the police, expecting a quick response. But in the early stages, the case was brushed aside with the same default narrative that seems to greet far too many missing teenagers. She probably ran away. Maybe she was upset. Maybe she needed space. Maybe this was typical teen behavior. Except it wasn't. Ali had left her phone charger, her money, and her plans behind. She had a new job she was excited about. She wasn't in a fight with anyone. She hadn't packed a bag. She had no known issues at school, no history of disappearing, and no one close to her, not even classmates, thought she had any reason to just vanish. But by the time investigators started treating the case as something more serious than a runaway, the trail was already going cold. Dogs were brought in to trace her scent. They followed it from her home, down the street, past the point she would have normally walked toward work. Then it stopped right near the intersection of Low Ridge and Spring Cypress, a quiet stretch of road. No cameras, no witnesses, just an invisible line where she seemed to vanish from the map. Her phone was never recovered. No transactions ever showed up on her bank card, no social media activity, no secret accounts, no confessions from friends, just nothing. A void, perfectly formed, with her name on it. Ali's parents did everything they could. They organized searches, set up a tip line, met with law enforcement, then grew frustrated with law enforcement. They pushed back against the runaway narrative, which haunted the early investigation like a curse. Her mother, particularly, became a public face of the search, persistent, exhausted, unwilling to let her daughter fade into the next click of a database. Over time, theories emerged. Some suggested she was lured by someone online, though her internet history didn't support that. Others thought she may have accepted a ride from someone she trusted, maybe even someone from the neighborhood. A few speculated about trafficking, but there was no direct evidence, just pattern matching and what-ifs. One man, a known predator, was eventually linked to possible activity in the area, but nothing connected him to Ali directly. No confession, no possession of her belongings, just proximity and suspicion and more silence. In the years since, her case has been reopened, reassigned, re-examined, and recirculated. But no concrete answers have emerged. She's been added to federal databases. Her image has been age-progressed, those haunting digital guesses at what she might look like now, always smiling, always approximated, always a little too clean. And that's the ache that lingers in this story. How normal it was. A Monday, a short walk, a teenager trying to get to work. No darkness, no warning, just a line crossed, and then nothing. The street where she disappeared hasn't changed much. The sidewalk still curves the same way. People still walk past the intersection, never realizing it's a vanishing point. There's no plaque, no sign, no scar on the ground to show that someone once walked here and then didn't. And as Ali's case remained suspended in the fog of suburban mystery, another one emerged, this time on a lonely stretch of Texas highway with a car pulled over, engine running, door open, and no driver in sight. The kind of disappearance that makes you start watching the rearview mirror a little more than usual. Cynthia Ba Traore. On the morning of May 9th, 2018, Cynthia Ba Traore's car was found sitting alone along a desolate stretch of Interstate 35 near Waco, Texas. The white Ford Focus was parked on the shoulder, undamaged, keys still in the ignition, engine off, doors locked. Inside, nothing was visibly wrong. No shattered glass, no scuffed footprints, no messages. Just the car, motionless against the endless hum of highway traffic. And yet Cynthia, a 39-year-old mother, graduate student, and by every measure a determined and grounded woman, was nowhere to be found. Cynthia's disappearance doesn't begin with a dramatic scene or a clear crisis. It begins with a day that was supposed to be normal. She had been visiting family in Waco. She had recently moved to Bryan College Station and was in the process of resettling, building a new chapter, reorganizing her life, stepping into something quieter after years of balancing school, work, and motherhood. She had plans, she had a schedule, and on that day, she was supposed to return home. But she never did. At first, no one panicked. Cynthia was independent, the kind of person who could navigate her own storms. She wasn't prone to impulsive decisions. She didn't flake. She didn't vanish. She was intelligent, deeply responsible, especially when it came to her children. When she didn't return calls that day, it registered as strange, but not alarming. Yet hours passed. Then, an entire night. And by the next morning, alarm was no longer optional. Police traced her last known movements, and it wasn't much. No phone calls after a certain point, no texts, no bank activity, nothing suspicious on her accounts. But her car parked just outside the city limits, facing south, was the only physical clue, a starting point with no next step. The search began with the usual methods: canvassing the area, questioning family and friends, reviewing traffic cameras, gas station footage, toll tags. Nothing. There were no known enemies. No reported threats. No hints of trouble in her personal life. Just a woman en route to her next day, who somehow never arrived. It's the kind of case that makes you distrust routine. Cynthia wasn't hiking in a national park. She wasn't driving at night through some remote corner of the state. She was on I-35, one of the busiest interstates in Texas, a lifeline that connects small towns to cities, winding through the heart of the state like a major artery. People drive it every day. People break down. People pull over. And yet, on that day, with cars rushing past at 70 miles an hour, someone or something took Cynthia out of her life, and no one saw a thing. There were rumors, of course, that maybe she decided to walk away from everything, that she wanted a reset. But that theory disintegrates fast. Cynthia didn't leave her purse. She didn't take her phone. She didn't pack anything. She had obligations, her kids, her studies, her future. She was in the middle of something, not at the end of it. Other theories whispered darker possibilities. That she picked up a hitchhiker. That she was forced off the road. That someone followed her, waited for the right moment, and acted with surgical precision. But none of those possibilities ever turned into facts. The highway, ever indifferent, just kept stretching forward. Her family did everything they could. Her mother spoke with news outlets, describing Cynthia as strong, determined, the kind of woman who didn't ask for help unless she needed it. They organized vigils, pleaded for tips, begged for even the smallest lead, something to explain how a person could be so completely removed from her own story. But there was no story. Not the kind that ends, only the one that loops. The car was found. The door was locked. The seat was empty. The highway was loud. No one saw. No one knows. Years later, the car still sits in an impound lot somewhere, tagged and processed. Officially part of the evidence, unofficially part of the silence. Cynthia's name remains on the missing persons list, often overlooked because her case didn't come with theatrics. It came with a whisper. The kind that disappears beneath the roar of 18-wheelers and the drone of highway pavement. And somewhere near that same stretch of I-35, not far in terms of miles, But decades away in time, another woman would vanish under circumstances just as unclear. But her case would take place at night, inside the corridors of a beachside hotel, and it would come with the same ending we've now seen too many times. No witnesses, no trace, and no way to close the door. Suzanne Renee Richardson. Galveston, Texas, June 1988. The beach town was already sliding into summer rhythm. Sunburned tourists, dragging coolers, seagulls hovering over French fries, salt clinging to air conditioners. But just blocks from the shoreline, inside the Coral Reef Hotel, something happened in the quietest hours of the night. Suzanne Renee Richardson, 22 years old, night auditor, student, dreamer, and part-time philosopher, was working the graveyard shift behind the front desk. By sunrise, she was gone. Suzanne was last seen around 6 a.m. on the 21st of June. She'd made it nearly through her entire shift. The security guard on duty that night reported seeing her at the front desk. She was doing her usual routine, balancing receipts, answering phones, prepping the ledger. Boring, methodical, the kind of end-of-shift quiet that's more about waiting than working. At some point, she told the guard she was going to check something at the back of the hotel. Maybe the pool, maybe the laundry area. She walked into the corridor, and that was the last moment anyone ever saw her. The guard waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then 20. Still no Suzanne. At first, maybe it seemed like a break, a bathroom trip, a distraction. But after an hour, it was clear something was wrong. She wasn't the type to walk off a shift. She didn't skip work. And the front desk was still open, vulnerable, not something you abandon without a reason. Her belongings were untouched. Her purse, her keys, her cigarettes. Her shift wasn't over, but she was no longer there. The search started slowly, then bloomed with urgency. Police were called, rooms were checked, employees questioned. No sign of her, no screams reported. No surveillance footage, not in 1988, just gaps in memory. And a growing sense that something had slipped through, unnoticed, right under everyone's noses. Investigators quickly ruled out the idea that Suzanne had simply walked off. Her car was still in the parking lot, her bank account went untouched. She had plans for the weekend. And more than that, she had a personality that didn't support flight. She was responsible, anchored, and deeply close to her family. This wasn't someone trying to disappear. This was someone who vanished in the space between sentences. The Coral Reef Hotel wasn't a glamorous place. It catered to the lower end of the budget traveler spectrum, a mix of construction workers, temporary guests, and occasional wanderers. It was the kind of place where names were forgotten quickly, and comings and goings blurred together. That made it hard to trace who might have been there that night, who might have noticed her, who might have followed. Over time, a few persons of interest emerged. One man staying at the hotel under a different name had a history of predatory behavior. Another guest, later imprisoned for an unrelated violent offense, was briefly considered a suspect, but there was never enough to tie anyone to Suzanne's disappearance. And then there was the theory that Suzanne might have been one of many. Galveston, and the wider stretch of I-45 between Houston and the coast, has long been whispered about as a corridor for the unexplainable. Too many missing women, too many bodies discovered, too many cases left open, disconnected by evidence but eerily similar in form. It's come to be known as the Texas killing fields, a phrase that sounds like fiction but isn't flowed. And while no one has definitively linked Suzanne's case to that pattern, the proximity is impossible to ignore. Her family refused to let her story be buried under statistics. For decades, they pushed. They appeared in media segments. They chased down theories. Her brother in particular became her voice, reminding the public, again and again, that Suzanne didn't just go missing. She was taken. She was erased. And someone, somewhere, knows how. But the file remains open and empty. Suzanne's name floats through cold case bulletins, usually accompanied by the same hopeful photo, her smile fixed, her hair styled just right, her eyes unaware of the fate about to unfold. And that's the haunting part, because the coral reef wasn't remote. It wasn't isolated. It was a hotel in a city with guests, staff, schedules, keys. It had rules, check-in times, shift rotations. It had order, and none of it was enough. Suzanne didn't leave in a car, didn't leave a note, didn't trigger a scream. She just left the front desk and never returned. And whatever happened in that corridor, whatever force intervened in that hour, it left behind nothing but absence. And further down that same cursed stretch of highway, another young woman would vanish not long after. A similar age, a similar story. But this time, her body would be found dropped like a riddle, offering more questions than closure and confirming what many already suspected, that the road between Houston and the Gulf doesn't just carry traffic, it carries ghosts. Sarah Ann Trusty. The 12th of July, 2002. Algoa, Texas, a town most people couldn't point to on a map, even if their lives depended on it. Quiet. Flat. The kind of place that hums with rural stillness, broken only by the occasional barking dog or the low rumble of a passing truck on FM 646. That afternoon, 3-year-old Sarah Ann Trusty got on her bicycle. She told her mother she was going for a short ride, just a loop, just to clear her head. She never came back. Sarah was smart, quiet, fiercely private, the kind of person who could hold a conversation with anyone but only trusted a few. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She wasn't known to take chances. She had a steady job, a boyfriend, and a protective family who loved her fiercely. She had goals. She was riding toward them, slowly, one small decision at a time. That afternoon, the sun was brutal. Texas in July doesn't ask for permission. It presses down. Sarah was wearing shorts, a tank top, and sneakers, nothing unusual. Her red bicycle had been a gift, something she used often, more for peace of mind than transportation. She knew the roads. She'd made the loop before. But this time, she didn't return home. When she failed to show up for dinner, her family called her phone. No answer. They drove the loop she usually took. Nothing. Not the bike. Not her. Not even a footprint in the gravel. Just silence. As if the space she'd once occupied had closed behind her like a trap door. The next morning, they called the police. At first, the response was measured. Sarah was an adult. Adults go off the radar sometimes. Maybe she stopped to see a friend. Maybe she'd had an argument. Maybe she just needed time. But her family pushed back. Sarah wouldn't do that. Not without a word. Not with dinner on the table and no message. Not without taking her things. The investigation began. Slowly. Too slowly. Days passed. Flyers went up. Volunteers searched ditches, tree lines, old farm roads. Then, on the 25th of July, nearly 2 weeks later, a group of riders on horseback discovered something in a field along FM 2004, miles from where Sarah was last seen. A body. It was Sarah. Identified by her dental records. The remains had been exposed to the elements, but it was her. The bicycle, however, was never found. The cause of death was listed as a homicide. There were no suspects, no obvious signs of struggle at the scene, no surveillance footage to review. The last person to see her alive was her mother, and that goodbye was casual, normal, without any sense of finality. Just another afternoon in a string of hundreds. But Sarah's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a signal. Because she wasn't the only young woman to vanish or turn up dead along the I-45 corridor. In fact, her case became part of a disturbing pattern, stretching from Houston to Galveston. Dozens of disappearances, beginning as early as the 1972nd, tied not by forensics, but by geography and chilling similarity. Sarah Trusty's name joined a growing list, all young women, most under 30, Many last seen walking, biking, or driving alone. Some bodies were recovered, others never were. But the thread that ran through them was impossible to ignore. Something, or someone, had made that stretch of Texas a hunting ground. Over time, the area became known as the Texas Killing Fields. Not because anyone wanted to call it that, but because no one could think of a better name for a place that seemed to consume young women without warning and without explanation. Law enforcement couldn't officially link all the cases. Too much variation. Too little evidence. But unofficially, the implication haunted everything. In Sarah's case, no arrests were ever made. Her boyfriend was questioned. So were local sex offenders. But no evidence stuck. Her mother continued to advocate for her, refusing to let her name fall into the pile of unsolved but quiet. She gave interviews, lobbied for task forces, and looked into the eyes of officials who had nothing left to offer but apologies and silence. What makes Sarah's story so devastating is that she almost made it. She wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was on her street, on her bike, near home. She could have been anyone. She was someone. And the person who took her, whoever they were, vanished just as completely as she had. No one saw, no one heard, just heat, silence, and then nothing. Her case remains open. Her name, etched into the public record, serves as a mile marker along that cursed corridor. And not far behind her, another name was waiting, a teenager with big eyes and a soft smile, walking home in the same stretch of land, unaware that she was about to become part of the same terrible story. Teresa Vanegas, Dickinson, Texas, November 2006. The air had shifted, not quite cold, but no longer the blinding heat of a Gulf Coast summer. That uncomfortable middle zone, where people wrap themselves in light jackets not because they need them, but because it feels like they should. 16-year-old Teresa Vanegas had walked out of her friend's house that evening, just a few blocks from home, and started on foot toward her own. It was a route she'd taken dozens of times. It should have taken her 10 minutes, maybe 12, if she was taking her time. She never made it. Teresa was the kind of teenager whose name didn't ring out beyond her own neighborhood. She wasn't a headline girl, not a prodigy, not a rebel, not a cautionary tale. She was, instead, real, unfiltered, a young woman trying to find her voice in a world that seemed too loud and too quiet at the same time. She was friendly, artistic, occasionally anxious, and impossibly sweet, a gentle mix of ambition and vulnerability that made her memorable to anyone who actually paid attention. Which, as it turns out, wasn't enough people. The night she disappeared, no one saw anything. No screams, no hurried footsteps, no cars speeding away. One moment she was walking, and the next, she was gone. Her family knew immediately something was wrong. Teresa didn't vanish. She wasn't the kind to sneak out or run off without a word. They called friends. No one had heard from her. They drove the short route between houses. Nothing. No backpack, no shoes, no phone. Just empty streets and that growing sense of nausea that only comes when the impossible starts to feel likely. Police were called. Flyers went up. Volunteers canvassed the area. For a few days, there was hope. Thin, desperate, but real. Maybe she'd gotten into a misunderstanding. Maybe she was hiding out, scared. Maybe she'd be found safe, like some stories end. But then, 6 days after she was last seen, the call came. A jogger found her body near a wooded area in League City, just over 10 miles from where she disappeared. It wasn't hidden, it wasn't staged. It was simply there, as if someone had dropped her back into the world after stealing her from it. The police called it a homicide. No further details were released to the public. Her cause of death was never openly discussed, at least not with the clarity or urgency you'd expect. The crime scene didn't offer the closure anyone was hoping for. No weapon, no witness, No time-stamped trail to follow. Only the absence that had defined the case from the beginning. What made Teresa's death stand out, if stand out is the right phrase in a graveyard of similar stories, was how completely disconnected it felt from logic. She wasn't out late. She wasn't alone in a sketchy area. She wasn't running with the wrong crowd. She was simply walking a well-worn path under suburban streetlights in a town where people were supposed to know each other's names. That's what made it worse. The proximity, the familiarity, the idea that whoever did this wasn't lurking in shadows but walking on sidewalks like the rest of us. For years, her case barely moved. It slipped into the background, swallowed by the volume of unsolved disappearances that haunt the stretch between Houston and Galveston. And that's no coincidence. Teresa's story falls squarely within the geography known as the I-45 corridor in the same cursed belt, where dozens of women and girls have vanished or turned up dead under strikingly similar conditions. Some victims were never found, others were recovered, only to leave behind more questions than answers. Teresa's family refused to let her memory erode. Her mother, in particular, became a quiet force of nature, pushing for answers, speaking to anyone who would listen, demanding that the city remember a girl who never made it home. She attended public hearings, launched vigils, and lobbied for her daughter's name to be spoken aloud in rooms where decisions were made. And yet, as of now, no one has been arrested. No one has been charged. Teresa's case remains open and hauntingly quiet. There are theories, of course, murmurs about serial patterns, about known predators, about gaps in the system that seem to let certain monsters pass through without resistance, but nothing solid, nothing official, nothing that her family or her memory deserves. What remains is the walk that never ended, the short route that stretched into an unsolvable riddle, a reminder that the most ordinary moments can sometimes hold the most extraordinary darkness. And Teresa's story, tragically, isn't the last of its kind. Because in that same Galveston County tangle of highways and marshes, two girls had vanished decades before both abducted, both murdered, both found in the surf, and their case, too, remains open. As if this whole region were built not on land, but on secrets that refuse to stay buried. Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson. It was the 15th of November, 1971. The water along the Galveston shoreline lapped against the sand with the sort of apathy only the Gulf can manage, neither inviting nor forbidding, just there. Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson, both 15, were best friends. They were also surfers. That wasn't common for girls in the early 72nd, not in a conservative coastal town like Galveston. But these girls didn't wait for permission. They rode waves and didn't mind being stared at. That morning, they did what teenagers do. They wandered the streets of their hometown, visited the surf shop, talked about boys, maybe skipped a class or two. They were seen hitchhiking later that day, just like 1,000 kids had before them and after. Galveston back then had a kind of loose charm, a sense of safety that came not from facts, but from familiarity. When you grow up next to the ocean, everything feels inevitable, even the risks. But when Debbie and Maria didn't come home that evening, that comfort cracked. Their families panicked quickly. These weren't girls who ran off. They were independent, sure, but not reckless, not stupid. They didn't take risks with strangers, at least, not the kind that would make them vanish. Police took the report. A search was launched. Flyers were printed. No digital footprints in those days. No pings, no security cameras, no live streams to replay. Just rumors and witnesses, half-remembered timelines and worried guesses. The community rallied. People walked the beaches with flashlights. Locals kept their radios on, waiting for updates that didn't come. Then, 2 days later, on the 17th of November, their bodies were discovered floating in Turner's Bayou, just outside of Texas City. They were both found nude, dumped together. The surfboards, the innocence, The optimism, all gone. Their final moments, never fully known. Investigators scrambled to make sense of the scene. At first, it looked like a crime of opportunity, but the method, the location, the timeline, the precision suggested more. This wasn't random. This was practiced, as if the person who did it had done it before or intended to do it again. The case shook Galveston County. Debbie and Maria weren't just local girls. They were familiar faces, known in the surf scene, in school hallways, in corner stores. Their deaths cracked the illusion that coastal small-town life insulated anyone from real horror. Suddenly, every parent had a new rule, and every teenager a new fear. But the killer, if there was only one, was already gone. Over time, rumors grew. Theories evolved. One man in particular came up more than once. Edward Harold Bell, a drifter, a convicted sex offender. He had been in the area. He had a past. And later, in a series of disturbingly calm letters, he confessed not just to Debbie and Maria's deaths, but to the murders of 11 girls he called the 11 who went to heaven. The letters were vague, poetic, maddening, the kind of confession that taunted more than clarified. But here's the problem. He was never charged with Debbie and Maria's murders. Despite his bizarre writings, and even later jailhouse interviews, law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't build a solid enough case. He remained imprisoned for other crimes. He died in 2019. And the case? Still unsolved. Debbie and Maria's story became one of the cornerstone tragedies in the larger web of disappearances and murders, now known as the I-45 killing fields. A chilling collection of unsolved cases, mostly young women, often clustered along a 50-mile stretch between Houston and Galveston. It's not an official designation. It's a term the media borrowed from war zones, but it fits. Because what's been lost here is not just lives, but any faith in resolution. The murder of Debbie and Maria wasn't just a standalone event. It was an early warning shot. A moment when the region was shown, in brutal clarity, that something was deeply wrong along its highways, beaches, and backroads. That someone, or some many, were hunting with patience and strategy and a cruel kind of certainty that they wouldn't get caught, and they didn't. The girls are buried now, their names engraved in headstones, their photographs laminated and fading at the edges. Their faces appear on cold case lists and documentaries, often paired with maybe suspects and dead ends. The sadness is permanent. The resolution is not. And just a few years later, the marshland near League City would begin offering up more bodies buried shallow, left to rot, erased without names for decades. Among them were 2 women whose names wouldn't be known until decades after their deaths. But the patterns were there. The same stretch of land, the same missing pieces, the same haunting conclusion. They were here, and then they weren't. Audrey Lee Cook. The stretch of Calder Road in League City used to be just another forgotten path, a rural shortcut between neighborhoods and marshland, where the overgrowth had grown comfortable, untouched. But in 1986, everything changed. A local dog wandered out of the brush carrying part of a human skull, and by the time police arrived to investigate, they'd unearthed a horror story buried in silence. What they found over the next years would become known, with a kind of blunt inevitability, as the Texas killing fields, and one of the women left behind in that cursed earth was Audrey Lee Cook. The body found in 1986 remained unidentified for decades. A set of bones, a fractured jaw, no wallet, no clothes, no clear cause. The remains were catalogued, boxed, and filed under the coldest category of forensic purgatory: Jane Doe. She was given a number, a case file, and then forgotten not by those who cared, but by the machinery of the system, which has a habit of letting real people become evidence. It wasn't until 201933, 3 years later, that the woman finally got her name back. Audrey Lee Cook. She had been a mechanic, Not the kind of profession most people would expect from a woman in the early 82nd, but Audrey didn't seem the type to ask for permission. She worked hard, kept mostly to herself. She was living in the Houston area, moving between jobs and relationships like anyone else in their late 20s. Not lost, but not exactly settled. And at some point in late 1985 or early 1986, she simply disappeared. No big headline, no missing posters, no coordinated search party. For years, it wasn't even clear if anyone had known she was missing. She had no children, no high-profile job, just an ordinary life, easily overlooked, until the day it ended and no one asked why. The location of her remains was the first clue that she wasn't alone. By the time Audrey's identity was confirmed through DNA and genealogy, 3 more bodies had already been found in the same area of Calder Road. All women, all young, all lost for years. Some longer, some shorter. Each case different in detail, in timeline, in recovery. But together, they painted a chilling portrait of indifference. League City didn't want to be a graveyard, but the dirt didn't care. For investigators, Audrey's case presented all the familiar challenges. No witnesses, no time of death, no suspect, no crime scene, at least not one that had been preserved. Whoever had put her in the field had done so with the knowledge that nobody would find her soon, and nobody did, for decades. Her identification in 2019 wasn't the end of the mystery. It was the beginning of new questions. Who killed her? Why there? Why her? Was she a target, or just a name picked at random from the city's roster of vulnerable people? Was there one killer responsible for the cluster of bodies found on Calder Road? Or were there many, each using the same isolated stretch of land to dump their guilt and walk away clean? The lack of resolution is the real terror here. Audrey's death, like so many others, may have been buried, but it was never solved. And her case bled into another literally within feet, where another woman had also waited decades to be named. Her bones rested not far from Audrey's, separated by time but not by fate. Like pages in the same story, shuffled and left in the dirt. Donna Prudhomme. When investigators unearthed the remains of another woman from the same League City field in 1991, they called her Jane Doe at first too. She was in her 30s. A necklace still clung to her bones. There were no IDs, no fingerprints, no distinguishing tattoos left behind, just the trace outline of a life that had ended far too quietly. For years, she was simply another entry in a database, another slide in a cold case presentation, another face rendered in clay by forensic artists who never knew her. In 2019, the same technology that identified Audrey finally gave this woman her name back as well. Donna Prudhomme. Donna had lived in the Houston area, bouncing between motels and temporary housing, often under aliases. She was a mother, a survivor, someone who had been trying to outrun a past that never seemed to get tired. She was last seen in 1991, not long before her body was buried just a few yards away from Audrey Cook. Forensic timelines put her death somewhere in the late summer of that year, but the facts stopped there. No one ever saw her being taken. No one heard her scream. If she tried to call for help, it never came. Her body lay in that brush, concealed by time and indifference, until years of erosion and a renewed investigation finally dragged her memory back into daylight. The proximity to Audrey's grave raised the same question. Was there a single killer using this field as their personal graveyard? Or was it simply a location that had become known to a small, horrible network of predators, a place where disposal required no plan, no cleanup, no witnesses? Some investigators have long believed that more than one person is responsible for the Texas killing fields cases. The gaps in victim profiles, the years between disappearances, the different methods of disposal, all suggest a tangled web, not a lone hunter. Others argue the killer simply evolved, changed habits, learned from each mistake. But the truth? It's never emerged. It just lingers, like the humidity, thick and inescapable. Donna's case remains unsolved. The most modern science in the world could give her a name, but not a cause of death, not a motive, not a reason why she ended up among the reeds, silent for decades while her family wondered what happened. And somewhere, across town, another woman's life would reach its own breaking point, not in a field, not on a roadside, but in the living room of her own apartment, a place where she should have been safe. Her story wouldn't involve burial or misidentification, but it would still end with the same brutal mystery. A woman vanished, without warning, and without a trace. Linda Maggie Riategui, Houston, Texas, October 2000. Linda Riategui was 32 years old, recently divorced, and in the middle of rebuilding her life. Her apartment in Southwest Houston was supposed to be a fresh start, a space she shared with her teenage son, full of second chances and reorganized dreams. She had been working, saving, keeping to herself. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't reckless, she just wanted a little peace. But something shattered that peace in the quiet hours of the day. She was last seen alive on the 9th of October. That same evening, her son returned home to find something terrifying in its ordinariness. The apartment was unlocked. The lights were off. A sense of absence hung in the air, not loud, not violent, just wrong. Linda was gone. At first, it didn't seem real. People don't just vanish from their own homes, not without signs, not without noise. But as police arrived and began investigating, they found evidence of a struggle, vague, inconclusive, but enough to raise suspicion. Her belongings were still there. Her car remained in the lot. Her phone wasn't taken. And her son, suddenly the center of a case no teenager should ever have to endure, could only repeat the same thing. She wouldn't have left like that. Days passed, then weeks. Leads were few. Suspects, none confirmed. The building she lived in was quiet, with neighbors who heard nothing, saw nothing, no forced entry, no goodbye. Just one more woman erased mid-sentence. Unlike some of the other missing persons cases tied to remote areas or isolated routes, Linda's disappearance felt like it mocked the idea of safety inside familiarity. This was her home, a place with locks and windows and community, and it wasn't enough. The hardest part? Nothing was ever found. No remains, no witnesses, no confessions. Her family was left to chase ghosts, sightings that never panned out, leads that collapsed under scrutiny, tips that led to nowhere but more silence. The case remains cold, the questions remain intact. Linda's face still circulates on missing persons flyers. Her smile, soft and distant, framed by the kind of optimism that has long since faded from the investigation. Her son, now grown, still waits. And the apartment she disappeared from has likely been repainted, re-rented, reimagined, as if nothing happened there at all. But it did. And like the others, her name stays frozen in that moment. Not just missing, not just cold, but unfinished. And just as Linda's story fades into unknowing, another name enters a teenager in Dallas, last seen walking out the front door on her way to a party. She told her family she'd be back later. She never was. Angela Renee Jaramillo, Dallas, Texas. It was a Friday night in early March of 2010, one of those cool, restless evenings that hints at spring, but still holds winter's chill. 16-year-old Angela Jaramillo left her house just after sunset, telling her family she was heading to a party. She promised she'd be back later that night. No big deal. Just another teenager doing what teenagers do. But the hours passed, and then the night, and then the weekend, and Angela never came home. To the outside world, Angela was like most girls her age, growing into herself, towing the line between childhood and adulthood, trying to balance freedom with responsibility. She was smart, kind, a little shy. Her family loved her deeply. She was someone with a future. She had goals. She had friends. She had things to do. This was not a girl who simply disappeared for attention or drama. And this was not a night that was supposed to change everything. Her family reported her missing almost immediately. The police response, however, was sluggish, which has become an unfortunate pattern in stories like these. Authorities initially suggested she might have run away. Maybe she got upset. Maybe she changed her mind. But that theory never matched her profile. Angela didn't take anything with her. No overnight bag. No stash of money. No signs of planning or intent to disappear. She just left. And then, somehow, she was gone. Leads were few. Witnesses at the party she was supposed to attend gave conflicting reports. Some said she never showed up. Others claimed she was seen outside the venue but didn't go in. A few people remembered her getting into a car, but no one could agree on what kind. The fragments were unhelpful, like a puzzle where half the pieces came from another box. There was no surveillance footage to review. No cell tower data led anywhere useful. Her social media accounts went silent. Her phone stopped pinging. For all practical purposes, she was erased the moment she stepped onto the sidewalk. And the search, like so many others, stalled out in that uniquely American way, a combination of red tape, limited resources, and the quiet, institutional shrug that often accompanies missing teenagers from marginalized communities. Angela's face appeared on flyers. Her name was added to lists. But, for the most part, the city moved on. Her family did not. They kept calling, kept asking, kept hoping. Years passed. Still, no answers, no body, no clues. Just the same hollow timeline stretching forward, day after day, until her case became a kind of invisible scar over the city, unseen, but never gone. Angela's story isn't full of twists or red herrings. It's not a story about what we know. It's a story about what we don't, and what that says about how easily a person can vanish without setting off alarms. And right around the same time, in a different part of Texas, another girl disappeared. Different background, different city, but the same age, the same silence, the same unanswered question. How can someone walk out the front door and never come back? Margaret Ann Quatley, Arlington, Texas. It was the tail end of summer in 2001 when 17-year-old Margaret Quatley vanished from her home. One moment, she was there, inside the walls of a house she'd grown up in, surrounded by the usual noise of family and familiarity. And then, she wasn't. Margaret was a senior in high school, bright, curious, loved music, wanted to do something creative. She had plans, not grand, but solid. She talked about college. She talked about getting her own place. She talked about life, not like it was a burden, but like it was a waiting room, something she just had to get through before it finally opened up. Her disappearance came without drama. No screaming fight, no ominous stranger, no red flags. She simply left, possibly to meet someone, possibly just for a walk, and never returned. Her family noticed quickly. There was no reason for her to be gone long, and yet she was. The early investigation hit the usual walls. Police questioned friends, dug through her social life, found nothing. No sign of a boyfriend she was hiding. No trace of a secret plan. No confessions from classmates. Just a blank page where a timeline should have been. Her family insisted she wasn't the kind of kid who would leave on purpose. She wasn't impulsive. She wasn't reckless. She cared deeply about her siblings. She was grounded, but in that way teenagers can be, right before the world hits them with its unpredictability. As days passed, leads dried up. Her phone remained silent, her bank account untouched. Flyers went up across Arlington. Local media ran a segment or two, then nothing. Over time, her case faded into that dreaded category. Unsolved, inactive, unsensational. Margaret became another name in a folder, Another photo on a cold caseboard, her smile preserved in a high school yearbook that no one reread. The hardest part of her story is its stillness. There's no event to analyze, no known suspect, no trail. Just a teenager who disappeared in the space between moments and a system that didn't have the tools or urgency to catch up. And as her story faded from the headlines, another woman, older, a taxi driver, would vanish from a completely different corner of Texas, under completely different circumstances. But the ending? The same. Crystal Lynn Russ. Houston, Texas, November 2000. Crystal Russ was 25 years old and working the late shift as a taxi driver. She wasn't glamorous, she wasn't famous, but she was real, hardworking, fierce in that quiet, unglamorous way women learn to be when the bills are due and no one else is going to fix it for you. She told her dispatcher that night that she wasn't feeling well. She was cutting her shift short, heading home. That should have been it. A normal end to a normal day. But Crystal never made it. Her cab was found later parked, locked, undamaged, nothing out of place, except her. She was gone. Crystal's disappearance was one of those cases that confounded even the most seasoned detectives. No signs of a struggle, no security footage, no helpful witness, just silence. The city swallowed her without a sound. She didn't have enemies. She didn't live recklessly. Her family described her as grounded, practical. She was working hard, planning for the future, trying to carve out something stable. There was no reason, none, for her to disappear. But she did, completely. Like so many other women who vanished in Houston's endless sprawl, Crystal's name began to drift. It would surface again every now and then on a poster, in an article, during a police press release asking for tips, but the trail never warmed. And her cab? It's likely long gone by now. Junked, auctioned, repainted, as if that night never happened, as if she was never behind the wheel. 3 women, 3 cities, 3 stories with no endings, different names, different paths, but the same vanishing point, the same silence, the same haunting reality that somewhere, somehow, they were taken out of their own lives, and no one has yet been able to say how. Claude Deons Pearson. Richardson, Texas, May of 2000. Claude Pearson was 39 years old, not the type you'd expect to vanish, not the type who gets forgotten easily. He was an artist, an introvert, and, according to those who knew him, a little eccentric in the ways that make someone fascinating. His tastes were precise, his habits were deeply patterned. A man of routines and rhythms, the kind you could set your watch to. And yet, sometime that spring, he vanished without so much as a note. Claude was last seen near his home in Richardson, a suburb tucked neatly into the northern edge of Dallas. It's the kind of place where streets are symmetrical, mail is delivered on time, and if you disappear, people notice. Or at least, you'd think they would. When Claude was reported missing, the response from law enforcement was measured, uncertain. He was an adult. He had no record of instability. There were no recent conflicts. But the strange part was that Claude had left some of his belongings in places that didn't make sense. His wallet, some clothing, and personal items were found scattered in a field in South Dallas, miles from his home. Not buried, not hidden, just placed, as if discarded mid-thought. The field itself offered no answers, no tire tracks, no blood, no signs of a scuffle, and no Claude. His car was never found, neither was his body. There were no confirmed sightings after the day he disappeared, and no notes in his handwriting. Everything about the case seemed suspended, like someone had pressed pause on his life and then never came back to resume it. Friends and family described Claude as quiet but warm, intensely private but not antisocial. He wasn't the type to just walk away, especially without telling his sister, to whom he was unusually close. He had dreams, unfinished art projects, letters he'd never sent. His apartment was undisturbed. His bills were paid. He was, by all accounts, preparing to keep going. And then he didn't. Theories cropped up, as they always do. Maybe he'd had a breakdown. Maybe he'd decided to reinvent himself. Maybe he'd been targeted. But none of these theories held weight. No transactions. No sightings. No motive. Just a man who quietly slipped out of existence one spring day, with the city none the wiser. And while Claude's case didn't make headlines, it never fully disappeared either. His name remains on the state's missing persons database. His case remains open, in theory. But the truth, it's cold. It's old. And for all anyone knows, Claude Pearson might still be out there somewhere, waiting for someone to find the next piece of the puzzle. Or maybe the silence is the only answer we'll ever get. And just months later, nearly 400 miles west, another man would vanish too. A different life, a different city. But once again, the same conclusion. Gone. Steven Rodriguez. Big Spring, Texas, July 2024. Summer was heavy in the air, dry heat blanketing the Permian Basin, cicadas buzzing in unison like background static. Steven Rodriguez was 33 years old and known around town. He wasn't famous, he wasn't infamous, just familiar, a presence. The kind of person you notice around the gas station, or nod to in passing without really knowing. And one day, he wasn't there anymore. His disappearance came without any warning. No known enemies, no debts, no threats, no medical crisis, just quiet, a soft, almost imperceptible absence. His car was left behind. His wallet too. And the place he was last seen? Unremarkable. No witnesses, no confrontation, just the end of the visible road. Weeks passed. Then months. By the time authorities confirmed his remains in April 2025, nearly 9 months after he vanished, the public had already moved on, but his family hadn't. They knew something was wrong long before there was any official announcement. The wait, they said, was worse than the truth. And the truth was this: Steven had died. His remains were found in a remote area outside of town. But the cause? Undetermined, and perhaps more chilling, unexplained. There was no sign of injury, no sign of a clear medical emergency, no toxins, no indication that he'd been trying to leave town or that he'd been forced. He was simply gone. For a while. And then found. With nothing in between. His case remains an open file, but the language surrounding it has already softened. Not murder, not accident, just pending. That purgatory word that sits on coroner reports and press releases like dust. The questions haven't gone away. Why did he end up where he did? What happened during those missing months? And perhaps the strangest question of all, how does a man disappear in plain sight, in a town where everyone knows everyone and no one sees a thing? The mystery of Steven Rodriguez isn't just about what happened to him. It's about how systems fail people who don't leave a trail, how silence becomes a verdict and missing becomes an identity. And yet his story, like so many in this twisted tapestry of vanishings, doesn't feel unique, because, in Texas, sometimes people just fall through the cracks, quietly, cleanly, permanently.